In January of 2006, a notable legal case captured widespread attention in the United States. It involved Dr. Sirel H., a respected forensic pathologist and former coroner of Allegan County in Pennsylvania. Dr. S. faced an indictment on 84 counts, including charges of fraud and misappropriation, accused of abusing his official position for personal benefit. The indictment, announced by U.S. Attorney Mary Beth Buchanan, alleged that Dr. S. misused county resources, such as government vehicles for personal travel, and directed county employees to assist with tasks related to his private practice. This case drew significant public interest due to Dr. S.'s prominence in forensic science and his involvement in high-profile investigations. The charges claimed he had defrauded the community by diverting public funds and assets for personal use, including improperly leveraging his official role to promote his consulting business. The legal proceedings sparked intense debate, with his defense team asserting that the allegations were politically motivated and exaggerated. They argued that the accusations involved minor offenses and that federal prosecution was unwarranted, emphasizing Dr. S.'s substantial contributions to forensic science and community service. They viewed the indictment as an overreach designed to tarnish his reputation. Conversely, prosecutors maintained that there was solid evidence of misconduct. They contended that Dr. S. had systematically exploited his public office for personal gain, breaching the trust placed in him by the public. The case became a focal point for discussions on the ethical duties of public officials and the limits between their official responsibilities and private interests. As the trial unfolded, both media and the public closely followed the proceedings, recognizing the case's significance for upholding ethical standards among government officials. The outcome of this case was expected to influence how authorities address misconduct and enforce accountability. The indictment of Dr. S. exemplifies the complexities involved in prosecuting public officials accused of ethical violations, highlighting the delicate balance between enforcing standards and considering political factors. Ultimately, this case underscored the ongoing challenge of ensuring integrity within public service while navigating the intricacies of legal and political contexts. As the legal proceedings against Dr. Sirel H. intensified, the case became one of the most heated and widely discussed public corruption trials in Pennsylvania's history. The prosecution, led by United States Attorney Mary Beth Buchanan, sought to demonstrate that Dr. Wex had systematically misappropriated county resources for personal profit, breaching both ethical standards and legal obligations expected of a public official. Conversely, the defense argued that the charges were exaggerated, politically motivated, and aimed at tarnishing the reputation of a highly respected forensic expert. Dr. Wex, renowned for his decades of work in forensic pathology, had established a prominent reputation through involvement in landmark cases such as the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, the deaths of Elvis Presley, and John Bennett Ramsey, among others. His expertise was highly valued, often leading to his role as an expert witness in some of the nation's most notable criminal investigations. However, this very prestige appeared to work against him, as he faced accusations of using his official position as county coroner to benefit his lucrative private consulting enterprise, which had generated millions over the years. The prosecution detailed how Dr. Wex allegedly exploited county resources for personal gain. Among the charges were claims that he improperly employed county staff to perform tasks unrelated to official duties, such as faxing, copying, and mailing documents for his private practice. Investigators uncovered thousands of pages of correspondence between his private clients and county employees, suggesting misuse of official channels. Additionally, he was accused of using county-owned vehicles for personal and business travel, logging miles that should have been billed to his private enterprise instead of taxpayers. A particularly damaging allegation involved a scheme to exchange unclaimed bodies from the county coroner's office for access to the University of Pittsburgh's anatomical donation program. Prosecutors claimed Dr. Wex arranged for unclaimed remains to be transferred to the university in return for use of their facilities, which directly benefited his private consulting work. This practice raised serious ethical questions about the handling of human remains and suggested potential illegalities driven by financial and professional interests. The defense countered strongly, asserting that these accusations were overstated and that such practices were common among forensic professionals, balancing public service with private consulting. They pointed out that Dr. Wex's consulting business had been openly known for years and that previous administrations had found no evidence of misconduct. Moreover, many of the alleged resource misuses, such as minor office tasks, were considered insignificant infractions that did not warrant criminal charges. Throughout the trial, both sides presented compelling arguments, but the case's complexity and the high-profile nature of the allegations kept public attention focused on the question of whether Dr. Wex's actions crossed ethical boundaries or simply reflected the blurred lines often present in the intersection of public service and private enterprise. The case against Dr. W., pursued by federal authorities, was often seen as politically motivated. Critics pointed out that Dr. W. had been an outspoken critic of the Bush administration and had publicly clashed with conservative officials, including U.S. Attorney Mary Beth Buchanan, appointed by President George W. Bush. Supporters argued that the prosecution was a retaliatory move aimed at discrediting a prominent figure known for challenging government narratives, especially in forensic investigations. Public opinion was sharply divided. Some viewed Dr. W. as a corrupt official abusing his position for personal benefit, while others believed he was a victim of political persecution. The case attracted intense media scrutiny, prompting legal experts to debate whether the charges justified such aggressive prosecutorial efforts. Critics noted that, although Dr. W. might have engaged in ethically questionable practices, the federal government's response seemed excessive for what were essentially administrative violations rather than serious criminal acts. During the trial, testimonies from former county employees played a pivotal role. Several claimed they had been instructed to perform tasks related to Dr. W.'s private business during work hours, such as copying documents, arranging travel for private forensic consultations, and organizing personal case files. The defense, however, presented witnesses arguing that the workload was light and that many officials regularly engaged in consulting activities without facing legal consequences. A key moment arose when prosecutors introduced emails and internal memos revealing that Dr. W. had been warned about potential conflicts of interest but continued his activities. This evidence was used to suggest he knowingly violated ethical standards, emphasizing that his actions were deliberate rather than accidental. As the trial unfolded, it drew widespread attention from forensic specialists, legal scholars, and political commentators. The case extended beyond Dr. W.'s conduct, raising questions about the broader risks for professionals balancing public service with private enterprise. A conviction could lead to significant prison time and set a precedent for similar cases in the future. Tensions in the courtroom grew as the prosecution maintained that no one, regardless of position, should be above the law, while the defense argued that Dr. W. was unfairly targeted and that the charges represented an abuse of prosecutorial authority. Ultimately, the jury faced the challenging task of determining whether Dr. W.'s actions amounted to criminal misconduct or if the case was, as his supporters claimed, a politically motivated attempt to silence a critic. A politically charged case against a highly regarded professional was nearing its conclusion, with both sides preparing their final arguments. The outcome promised to have significant implications, not only for Dr. Wet, but also for the wider legal and forensic communities. As the trial entered its last phase, the courtroom's atmosphere grew tense. Over weeks, the prosecution and defense had meticulously presented their cases, calling witnesses and analyzing evidence. The prosecution contended that Dr. Sirel H had deliberately exploited his official position, misusing taxpayer-funded resources for personal gain. Conversely, the defense argued that the charges were driven by political motives, exaggerated, and aimed at damaging a distinguished forensic scientist's reputation. It was now the jury's task to evaluate these arguments and decide the case's fate. Before deliberation began, the prosecution delivered a compelling closing statement. The lead prosecutor highlighted key issues: the misuse of county employees and resources, personal travel expenses charged to the public, and a controversial exchange deal. They pointed out that Dr. Wett had been warned multiple times about potential conflicts of interest, but continued his actions, suggesting a pattern of disregard for the law. The prosecutor emphasized that this was not a matter of oversight, but a case of a man believing himself above accountability, misappropriating public funds, personnel, and even human remains for personal profit. The defense's final speech took a contrasting tone. They urged the jury to see the case as a politically motivated attack, emphasizing Dr. Wett's long career of service, his contributions to forensic science, and his role in solving major criminal cases. The defense portrayed him as a target, not because of any criminal intent, but due to the enemies he had made over the years. They argued that the case extended beyond Dr. Wett, warning that if minor administrative errors could lead to prosecution, then any public servant could be vulnerable, potentially criminalized for routine office activities. After days of closing arguments and detailed instructions from the judge, the jury was sent to deliberate. Legal experts speculated that the case could go either way. Some believed the prosecution's evidence of financial misconduct was strong enough for conviction, while others thought the defense had successfully cast doubt on the motives behind the charges. The jury took several days to review documents, testimonies, and specific pieces of evidence, indicating they were grappling with the case's complexity and the weight of the evidence presented. In a case where some charges, such as the misuse of county employees, appeared straightforward, others, like the alleged trading of cavers, proved more contentious. Despite extensive deliberation, the jury ultimately declared itself deadlocked, unable to reach a unanimous decision. Faced with this impasse, the judge had no choice but to declare a mistrial. The courtroom responded with a mix of reactions. Some gasped, others muttered, and both sides displayed clear signs of frustration. The prosecution had hoped for a conviction, while the defense aimed for a full acquittal. Instead, the case ended in legal uncertainty, leaving many questions unresolved. In the days that followed, legal experts debated what steps might come next. The prosecution could opt to retry the case, but this would demand considerable time and resources. Given the mixed public opinion and ongoing debates about the political implications of the charges, some believed a retrial might not be justified. Others, however, thought that the government would continue to pursue the case to preserve its credibility. The case took an unexpected turn in 2008 when a new administration under President Barack Obama made changes within the Department of Justice. Mary Beth Buchanan, the prosecutor who had led the case against W., was no longer in charge. Without her leadership, the department decided not to pursue a second trial. Consequently, the case was officially dismissed, and Dr. Wett was released from any further legal obligations. Emerging from this legal ordeal, Dr. Wett's career and reputation had suffered, yet he remained resilient. He publicly voiced his belief that he had been wrongfully targeted and continued his work in forensic pathology. He resumed giving lectures, writing books, and providing expert testimony in criminal cases. While some critics argued he had crossed ethical boundaries, others viewed him as a victim of an overly aggressive prosecution. The case of Dr. Sirel H became a significant example of the complex interplay between legal misconduct, political influence, and ethical dilemmas faced by professionals in public service. It raised vital questions about prosecutorial authority, the role of politics in justice, and whether minor administrative violations should be criminalized. Over the years, legal scholars debated its implications, with some seeing it as a cautionary tale emphasizing the importance of ethical integrity in public office. Others viewed it as evidence of how political forces can distort the justice process, leading to cases that might not have been pursued under different circumstances. Regardless of perspective, the case left a lasting mark on both legal and forensic communities. It became a story of controversy, illustrating the delicate balance between ethical lapses and criminal proceedings. Though Dr. Wett was never convicted, his courtroom battle served as a reminder that even highly respected professionals are not immune to scrutiny or influence. In January of 2006, a notable criminal case emerged in the United States, highlighting the intersection of law enforcement, politics, and public oversight. The case involved former managers of the Bank of China who faced serious allegations. A grand jury in Las Vegas formally charged Chaan, Su Guojun, and their spouses with crimes, including racketeering, money laundering, and fraud. The indictment claimed that these individuals devised a scheme to siphon off more than $485 million from the bank, then laundered the stolen funds through a network of accounts spanning several countries. Their goal was to conceal the origins of the money and integrate it into legitimate financial channels. A distinctive aspect of the laundering process was the use of Las Vegas casinos. The accused allegedly purchased gambling chips, engaged in minimal betting, and then cashed out, transforming illicit funds into seemingly clean money. This operation was part of a broader, sophisticated effort involving international cooperation among U.S. law enforcement and global partners. The case underscored the difficulties law enforcement faces when tackling complex financial crimes that cross borders and employ intricate laundering techniques. The investigation highlighted the importance of international collaboration in tracking and recovering illicit assets. It also served as a reminder of the vulnerabilities within financial institutions, which can be exploited by individuals in trusted positions. The case was part of a larger initiative by the U.S. Department of Justice to address major financial misconduct and hold accountable those who misuse the financial system for personal benefit. Given the prominence of the defendants and the complexity of the alleged activities, legal proceedings drew significant attention. The outcome was expected to influence future efforts to prosecute international financial crimes and to shape law enforcement strategies. Ultimately, this case exemplifies the ongoing challenges in detecting and preventing sophisticated financial misconduct, emphasizing the critical role of global cooperation. It also highlights the necessity for strong internal controls within financial institutions to prevent such breaches, reaffirming the commitment of authorities to uphold integrity and justice in the financial sector. The case involving former managers of the Bank of China, Chaan and Su Guojun, was far more than a simple act of misappropriation. It was a sophisticated financial crime that spanned multiple continents, involving elaborate laundering schemes and years of evasion from authorities. Exploiting their positions within one of China's largest financial institutions, they secretly siphoned off an estimated $485 million. Their operation was made even more complex by their ability to route stolen funds through a web of offshore shell companies, foreign bank accounts, and high-stakes gambling in Las Vegas, a city renowned for its untraceable cash flow. For years, Su and Su lived opulently in the United States under false identities, believing they had successfully evaded both Chinese and American law enforcement agencies. Their wives, Kwang Fong and Yingyi, played crucial roles in facilitating the transfers, moving vast sums across various jurisdictions. Investigations later revealed that portions of the stolen money had been funneled through banks in Canada and the Caribbean before reaching Las Vegas casinos. There, the funds were cleverly laundered through high-limit baccarat games, where large amounts of chips were purchased, played minimally, and then cashed out in small, less conspicuous sums. The casinos, unaware of the true origins, issued checks that masked the illicit source, allowing the criminals to integrate the money into the legitimate financial system. The operation unraveled when financial analysts and regulators in China detected irregularities in accounts associated with the Guangdong branch of the Bank of China, where the two managers had worked. Internal audits uncovered significant discrepancies, and further investigation traced the missing funds to international transfers leading to the United States. Alarmed by the scale of the fraud, Chinese authorities requested assistance from U.S. law enforcement, marking the start of a joint international effort. The investigation, led by the Department of Justice, FBI, Department of Homeland Security, and Chinese officials, involved meticulous tracking of financial transactions, surveillance, and evidence collection across several countries. The breakthrough came when authorities identified the two managers living in the United States under false names, enjoying luxurious homes, expensive cars, and an extravagant lifestyle far beyond their legitimate earnings. Law enforcement obtained wiretaps and financial records that exposed their network of offshore accounts and cross-border transfers. This evidence culminated in a grand jury indictment in January of 2006, charging them with conspiracy, money laundering, racketeering, and fraud. The story unfolded around a complex financial scheme that defrauded one of China's largest banks of nearly $500 million. When law enforcement finally moved to apprehend the suspects, they encountered unexpected resistance. One of the men, Su Guojun, attempted to escape, leading to a tense confrontation. It appeared he had been warned about the impending arrest and tried to flee through an emergency exit at a hotel in Las Vegas. However, undercover agents nearby quickly intercepted him. Meanwhile, his wife Yingyi was caught attempting to destroy financial records at their home, further implicating her in the scheme. Another key figure, bank manager Su Chaan, was detained without resistance. Initially, he denied any wrongdoing, claiming the funds were obtained legally and that the charges were unfounded. Yet, investigators had gathered substantial evidence against him, including bank statements, recorded conversations, and expert analyses of the complex transactions. The indictment revealed that the stolen money had been used not only for personal luxury, but also to bribe officials and associates who helped them evade detection for years. Some of the funds had been transferred to companies based in Hong Kong with no legitimate business activity, while others moved through shell corporations created solely for laundering purposes. Authorities also uncovered safe deposit boxes filled with large sums of cash, highlighting the extent of their efforts to hide their wealth. As the case advanced, prosecutors faced the challenge of proving the financial crimes while managing the legal intricacies of international cooperation. The Chinese government was deeply invested in ensuring justice, as the scandal had become a source of national embarrassment. Since the suspects were arrested in the United States, their prosecution had to conform to American legal standards. Defense attorneys argued that the case was politically motivated and that their clients were unfairly targeted amid tense diplomatic relations. Despite these objections, federal prosecutors remained confident, citing overwhelming evidence and the scale of the fraud as among the most significant in U.S. history. With the trial approaching, prosecutors prepared to present years of investigative work, including detailed financial records and testimonies from key witnesses. The courtroom was set to become a battleground, where the prosecution and defense would debate not only the guilt of the accused, but also the broader issues surrounding international financial crimes and jurisdiction. As the legal proceedings commenced, the case promised to have lasting implications for how such crimes are prosecuted across borders. The prosecution outlined an intricate scheme orchestrated by Chaan and Su Guojun, revealing how the former bank managers exploited their authority to divert funds from the Bank of China. They transferred money across borders through a network of shell companies and fraudulent transactions, with evidence including charts, wire transfer records, and casino logs. These records demonstrated how the stolen funds were funneled into gambling operations in Las Vegas, where they were laundered and reintroduced into the financial system. A key piece of evidence was surveillance footage from casinos, showing Chaan and Su Guojun exchanging large sums of cash for chips, sitting briefly at tables, then cashing out as winnings, an approach known as minimal play, commonly used in money laundering to legitimize illicit gains under the guise of gambling. Financial experts testified to unravel the complex web of transactions, explaining how the stolen money was routed through offshore accounts in Canada, Hong Kong, and the Caribbean before reaching U.S. financial institutions. Bank auditors highlighted irregularities that initially prompted the investigation, while forensic accountants detailed how funds moved through multiple jurisdictions. Law enforcement officers described their extensive efforts to track down the suspects and piece together the financial puzzle. Despite the overwhelming evidence, the defense attempted to portray their clients as victims of political bias, arguing that tensions between the United States and China influenced the case, and that their clients had been unfairly targeted due to their former employment at the Bank of China. They also questioned the integrity of some financial records, suggesting possible manipulation by Chinese authorities. However, these arguments failed to gain traction amid the mounting evidence, bank records, emails, recorded conversations, and expert testimonies, all pointing to a deliberate long-term scheme to defraud the bank and launder stolen funds internationally. An unexpected witness, a former accomplice who cooperated with authorities in exchange for a reduced sentence, provided crucial insights into the operation. This individual detailed instructions from Chaan and Su Guojun on transferring funds, establishing dummy corporations, and evading detection. Their testimony reinforced the prosecution's assertion that this was not a case of political bias, but a meticulously planned financial crime. As the trial drew to a close, prosecutors delivered a powerful closing statement highlighting the extensive scale of the deception, the advanced techniques employed to launder the stolen funds, and the audacity of the defendants. They pointed out how the accused had lived comfortably in the United States, convinced they were beyond the reach of justice. The prosecutors argued that a conviction would not only hold these individuals responsible, but also serve as a clear warning about the repercussions of financial crimes that span multiple nations. The jury spent several days meticulously examining the overwhelming evidence before reaching their verdict. When they finally announced it, the courtroom was filled with palpable tension. The decision was read aloud. Guilty on numerous charges, including conspiracy, fraud, money laundering, and racketeering. The subsequent sentencing phase saw the prosecution push for lengthy prison terms, emphasizing the gravity of the offenses. The defense requested leniency, citing the defendants' ages and their prior time in detention awaiting trial. However, the judge, considering the enormous amount of money stolen and the complex nature of the crimes, imposed significant sentences. Chaan and Su Guojun each received over 20 years in federal prison, while their spouses received somewhat lighter but still substantial terms for their involvement in enabling the scheme. This conviction marked the culmination of a lengthy case that involved multiple countries, representing a notable victory for authorities in both the United States and China. It demonstrated that even the most elaborate financial schemes could be uncovered and prosecuted, regardless of where the perpetrators believed they could hide. The case also established a precedent for international cooperation in financial investigations, underscoring the importance of collaboration between governments and law enforcement agencies to track down those who exploit the global financial system. In the wake of the trial, financial institutions across China and the United States strengthened their measures to identify and prevent similar schemes. Regulatory bodies increased oversight of cross-border transactions, and casinos in Las Vegas adopted stricter anti-money laundering procedures. This case served as a stark reminder of how financial systems can be manipulated for illicit purposes and the vigilance needed to prevent such abuses. Despite their convictions, the story of Chaan and Su Guojun remained a cautionary tale about greed, deception, and the limits of impunity. For years they had lived as if untouchable, but ultimately, justice prevailed. Their downfall was not only a legal victory, but also a testament to the relentless efforts of law enforcement agencies in pursuing those who seek to manipulate the system for personal gain. In Telok Blangah, a tragic incident unfolded involving 37-year-old Constant Chi Chong-hin, a former Singapore Airlines stewardess. Chi, who had been romantically involved with Cindy's father, took the young girl to her apartment under distressing circumstances. During this ordeal, Cindy was unexpectedly thrown from a high-rise building, suffering severe head injuries that ultimately led to her passing 5 days later. The case attracted intense media attention, not only because of Cindy's tender age, but also due to the complex web of personal relationships and psychological factors involved. Initially, Chi faced charges of abduction and murder. However, as investigations progressed, it was revealed that she was suffering from schizophrenia, a mental disorder that profoundly affects perception and judgment. This diagnosis became pivotal in shaping the legal response. Following comprehensive psychiatric assessments and legal discussions in January 2006, the original murder charge was downgraded to culpable homicide not amounting to murder, recognizing her diminished mental capacity at the time of the incident. The court acknowledged that, although Chi had intentionally caused Cindy's death, her actions were significantly influenced by her mental state. This adjustment reflected the justice system's understanding of the complex relationship between mental health and criminal responsibility. The trial drew widespread public interest, with many expressing sympathy for the young victim while also showing empathy towards Chi's mental health struggles. The case underscored the challenges faced by the legal system in delivering justice that considers both societal safety and the well-being of individuals with mental illnesses. On the 7th of April in 2006, the High Court sentenced Chi to a total of 13 years in prison, 10 years for culpable homicide, and 3 additional years for abduction. The sentence took into account her mental health condition, the gravity of her actions, and the need for both punishment and rehabilitation. The court emphasized the importance of providing appropriate treatment for individuals with severe mental disorders to prevent similar tragedies in the future. This case sparked widespread discussion across Singapore about mental health awareness, the adequacy of support systems, and the necessity of a compassionate approach within the criminal justice framework. It highlighted the importance of early intervention, education, and robust mental health services to protect vulnerable individuals and prevent such devastating incidents. The tragic loss of young Cindy Neo remains a poignant reminder of societal vulnerabilities and the critical need to address mental health issues proactively, ensuring that justice and compassion go hand in hand. The tragic death of Cindy Neo became a focal point for discussions surrounding mental health, criminal responsibility, and the delicate balance between justice and rehabilitation. As the court examined the case in detail, new information emerged about Chi's background, her struggles with schizophrenia, and the events leading up to that tragic day in October of the year 2004. Once a promising young woman, she had been a flight stewardess with Singapore Airlines before her life took a downward turn following her diagnosis. Schizophrenia, a disorder that impairs a person's ability to think clearly, regulate emotions, and interact socially, profoundly affected her personal and professional life. Her condition worsened to the point where she could no longer hold a job, and she battled feelings of isolation, paranoia, and delusional thoughts. Her relationship with Cindy's father, Neo and Tong, initially appeared hopeful, but eventually became strained due to her mental health struggles. By the time of the incident, Neo had moved on and was focused on raising his daughter. However, Chi, overwhelmed by emotional instability, could not accept the end of their relationship. Her fixation on Neo and his child culminated in the tragic events of October 7th, 2004. On that day, she went to Cindy's home in a certain neighborhood seeking to see Neo, but he was absent. In a sudden, unprovoked act, she took Cindy and left, bringing the child back to her own apartment on Boon Taiyang Road. This act of abduction became a central charge in her case. What happened next remains a subject of horror and debate. According to the prosecution, Chi deliberately threw Cindy from a high-rise apartment window, resulting in fatal injuries. The defense, however, offered a different perspective, suggesting that in her delusional and unstable state, Chi had not intended harm but acted impulsively amid psychological distress. This argument was crucial in seeking to reduce her charge for murder to culpable homicide not amounting to murder. Cindy suffered severe head trauma and multiple fractures upon hitting the ground. Despite urgent medical intervention, she succumbed to her injuries 5 days later. Her death devastated her family and ignited nationwide outrage, prompting many to question whether warning signs had been overlooked. During the trial, psychiatric experts testified that Chi had been suffering from schizophrenia, and her actions were influenced by her mental condition. While the prosecution acknowledged her mental illness, they argued that it did not fully absolve her of responsibility. They maintained that despite her impaired judgment, she was still aware of her actions at the time. At the time of the incident, the defense highlighted Chi's declining mental health in the years leading up to the event. They pointed out her struggles with delusions, paranoia, and emotional instability, emphasizing that these issues significantly influenced her behavior. The defense argued that her actions were not driven by premeditation, but were instead the tragic outcome of untreated mental illness spiraling beyond control. Faced with this context, the court faced the challenging task of determining an appropriate punishment. Singapore's legal system is known for its strictness, especially regarding violent offenses involving children, which are regarded with utmost seriousness. However, the court also recognized mental illness as a factor that could mitigate responsibility, shaping the final decision. As the trial unfolded, public opinion was sharply divided. Some believed she deserved the harshest penalties given the loss of an innocent life. Others viewed her as a victim of her own mental health condition, arguing that she required treatment rather than lengthy imprisonment. This case sparked widespread debate about the relationship between mental health and criminal justice, raising questions about whether Singapore's legal framework adequately protects individuals with severe psychiatric conditions. Ultimately, the court determined that although her mental illness influenced her actions, she bore some responsibility. Her charge was reduced from murder to culpable homicide not amounting to murder, reflecting her diminished mental state. Additionally, she was convicted of abduction, which contributed to her overall sentence. On April 7, 2006, Constance Chi received a total of 13 years in prison, 10 years for culpable homicide and 3 for abduction. The verdict elicited mixed reactions. Some felt it was too lenient considering the gravity of the crime, while others believed the court had balanced accountability with compassion by acknowledging her mental health issues. This case had lasting effects on Singapore's legal approach to defendants with mental illnesses, prompting discussions about the importance of mental health awareness and early intervention. Many wondered if proper psychiatric care could have prevented the tragedy. Even after the trial, the memory of Cindy's death remained a stark reminder of the critical need for mental health support and the delicate balance between justice and compassion within the justice system. The incident left a profound mark on society, inspiring ongoing debates about mental health, legal responsibility, and the importance of early treatment. The case's legal and psychological implications continue to be a topic of national reflection, highlighting the enduring challenge of integrating mental health considerations into criminal justice. The tragedy involving Constance Chi in the film Left Behind left many questions unanswered. How did her mental health decline to such a dangerous level without intervention? Could earlier treatment have prevented this devastating outcome? Most critically, how can Singapore ensure that similar incidents are never repeated? Public opinion remained divided. Some believed that the punishment was too lenient given the severity of the crime, the abduction and killing of a 4-year-old girl. For many, this loss was an unthinkable tragedy, and they felt justice had not been fully served. Parents, in particular, struggled to accept that someone could commit such an act and escape the harshest penalties under Singapore's strict legal system. To them, Chi's mental illness did not justify her actions. Instead, she was seen as a dangerous individual who had taken an innocent life and deserved the maximum punishment. Conversely, mental health advocates and legal experts argued that the case highlighted the importance of considering psychiatric conditions during criminal proceedings. Schizophrenia, a complex and severe mental disorder, can impair judgment, distort perception, and lead to unpredictable behavior. While her actions were undeniably tragic, some viewed them as the result of systemic failure, an indication that she had not received the necessary treatment and support. These advocates called for increased awareness of mental illness and emphasized that the justice system should adopt a more rehabilitative approach for offenders suffering from serious psychiatric conditions. Throughout these debates, one fact remained clear. Since Neo's death, her family was left to grapple with an unimaginable loss. Her father, Neo in Tong, was devastated, having lost not only his daughter, but also any sense of normalcy in his life. His grief was intensified by guilt, as he had once been involved with Chi, and now that past connection had contributed to his child's tragic end. For years after the incident, he struggled to move forward, haunted by memories of Cindy and the brutal, senseless manner of her death. Chi's sentencing also drew attention to how Singapore's justice system handles individuals with severe mental illnesses who commit crimes. While she was incarcerated, questions arose about whether she would receive adequate psychiatric care and whether her mental health would be properly managed. Concerns emerged about her potential risk to herself or others while in detention. These issues sparked broader discussions about the need for specialized facilities where mental health treatment could be integrated with rehabilitation and incarceration, ensuring offenders with psychiatric conditions receive appropriate support. In the years that followed, the case of Constance Chi became a reference point in legal and academic circles, illustrating the complexities surrounding criminal responsibility and mental illness. It served as a poignant case study in law schools, prompting ongoing debates about how justice systems should balance accountability with compassion and treatment for those suffering from severe psychiatric disorders. In a recent debate among students, the question of whether justice had truly been achieved prompted professors to emphasize the complexities involved in balancing punishment with rehabilitation. This discussion was especially relevant when offenders' actions were influenced by mental health conditions that impaired their judgment. Singapore's legal community took note, recognizing that despite the country's long-standing reputation for strict laws and severe penalties for violent offenses, cases involving mental illness required a more nuanced approach. Judges and prosecutors grew increasingly aware of the importance of psychiatric evaluations in such cases, prompting defense attorneys to advocate more vigorously for their clients to undergo mental health assessments when appropriate. Simultaneously, mental health organizations seized the opportunity to raise public awareness about conditions like schizophrenia and other serious psychiatric disorders. Campaigns were launched to educate Singaporeans on recognizing symptoms, understanding the importance of early intervention, and accessing available support resources. These initiatives aimed not only to prevent similar tragedies, but also to diminish the stigma surrounding mental illness, which often hindered individuals from seeking help. Despite these positive shifts, the pain of Cindy's family remained profound. No amount of justice could restore her. They were left with memories, moments of her short life that now haunted them. Each passing birthday served as a reminder of what was lost. The sound of children's laughter, the sight of young girls in school uniforms, even the aroma of Cindy's favorite foods. These everyday scenes became painful symbols of a life abruptly taken away. Constance Chi's incarceration was not solely a punishment, but also a form of reckoning. She had lost her career, her freedom, and her previous life. Although she was diagnosed with a mental disorder at the time of her offense, she experienced moments of clarity, forcing her to confront the enormity of her actions. Her sentence was a process of coming to terms with the harm caused, yet questions lingered about her full understanding of her crime's severity and her potential for reintegration into society after release. Ultimately, the case of Constance Chi and Cindy Neo transcended mere legal proceedings, reflecting Singapore's evolving perspective on mental illness, criminal responsibility, and justice. It compelled the nation to confront difficult questions about managing individuals who commit serious offenses while suffering from severe psychiatric conditions. The case underscored the urgent need for stronger mental health support systems and a legal framework capable of fairly addressing cases involving diminished responsibility, highlighting the ongoing challenge of balancing compassion with justice. The lingering echoes of this case persisted long after the courtroom proceedings concluded and the headlines faded, serving as a stark reminder of life's delicate nature. It highlighted the devastating effects of untreated mental health issues and the profound influence that crime can have on both victims and those responsible. While Singapore has always taken pride in its strict laws and low crime rates, this incident revealed that not all offenses fit neatly into categories of right or wrong. Sometimes justice exists in a complex, nuanced spectrum of shades rather than clear black and white. In January of 2006, Japan was shaken by a high-profile corporate scandal that would significantly impact its financial markets and corporate governance standards. At the heart of the controversy was Livio, an internet services conglomerate led by its ambitious and outspoken CEO, Takami Hori. Known for his bold attitude and unconventional business style, Hori had become a prominent figure representing a new wave of entrepreneurs challenging traditional Japanese corporate norms. The crisis erupted on January 16th when Tokyo prosecutors launched a series of high-profile raids on Livio's offices, residences, and the homes of key executives. These actions were part of an investigation into allegations of securities fraud and violations of Japan's securities laws. Authorities suspected that Livio had been involved in spreading false information to artificially inflate its stock price and had engaged in questionable accounting practices to conceal its true financial condition. The immediate aftermath was chaotic. Investors, alarmed by the sudden scrutiny of a previously favored stock, initiated a massive sell-off on January 17th and 18th. Trading volumes on the Tokyo Stock Exchange soared to unprecedented levels, prompting a market panic. The exchange's trading system was overwhelmed, leading to an unprecedented early halt in trading to prevent complete system failure, a first in its history. As the investigation deepened, more troubling details emerged. On January 18th, Hiaki Noguchi, an executive at HS Securities, a firm closely linked to Livio and also under investigation, was found dead in a hotel room in Naha, Okinawa. Authorities declared his death a suicide, adding a tragic dimension to the unfolding scandal. By January 23rd, Takami Hori and 3 other company officials were arrested on charges of securities fraud, marking a dramatic downfall for the once celebrated CEO, who had been seen as a maverick challenging Japan's corporate traditions. This scandal not only tarnished Livio's reputation, but also sent shockwaves through Japan's financial markets. It prompted increased scrutiny of corporate practices and a reassessment of regulatory frameworks, exposing vulnerabilities within the system. The incident served as a sobering reminder that even in a nation proud of its discipline and order, the integrity of its financial and corporate sectors remains fragile and susceptible to complex challenges. The scandal that rocked Japan's financial sector exposed serious flaws in the country's corporate oversight, prompting calls for tighter regulation. It ignited a nationwide debate about business ethics, transparency, and the delicate balance between innovation and control. The repercussions of this incident resonated for years, shaping reforms and transforming the landscape of Japanese corporate governance. In a broader sense, the Live Door scandal served as a stark warning about the risks of rapid corporate growth without sufficient checks and balances. It underscored the vital importance of upholding ethical standards and the crucial role of regulatory agencies in protecting market integrity. The events of January of 2006 remain a defining chapter in Japan's business history, illustrating the complex relationship between ambition, morality, and legal compliance. As investigations deepened, public and media attention fixated on Takafumi H., the charismatic founder whose meteoric rise and sudden fall drew widespread scrutiny. Known for his outspoken nature and unconventional style, H challenged Japan's traditional corporate norms. Unlike the conservative executives typical of the country, he flaunted his wealth, dressed casually rather than in formal business attire, and often clashed with Japan's established business elite. He embodied a new wave of entrepreneurs eager to break free from the country's rigid corporate culture. Initially, many admired his boldness, viewing it as a sign of fresh innovation. However, as allegations against him grew, perceptions shifted dramatically. What was once celebrated as entrepreneurial spirit was now seen as reckless greed. His actions, once considered daring, were now scrutinized as manipulative and deceptive. The media portrayed him as a symbol of corporate excess and dishonesty, accusing him of manipulating stock prices for personal gain. The subsequent raids, market chaos, and the tragic suicide of Hideki Noguchi only deepened the impression that something deeply corrupt was occurring behind the scenes at Live Door. Legal charges against H and his associates focused on securities fraud and accounting irregularities. Prosecutors accused the company of artificially inflating earnings through a network of subsidiaries designed to create the illusion of higher revenue. Essentially, Live Door was alleged to have engaged in window dressing, manipulating financial statements to appear more profitable than reality. The company also issued misleading press releases, falsely claiming acquisitions that never occurred, further deceiving investors. The fallout was swift and extensive. The Tokyo Stock Exchange, still reeling from the Asian financial crisis years earlier, was thrown into turmoil. Panic selling of LiveDoor shares spread rapidly, triggering a market-wide decline. Both institutional and retail investors saw their holdings plummet in value, causing widespread financial distress. The scandal not only shook investor confidence, but also prompted a reevaluation of corporate practices and regulatory oversight across Japan. Investors who had placed their trust in H's vision of a revitalized corporate Japan faced substantial financial setbacks. As criticism mounted, questions arose about how a company as large and influential as LiveDoor could have operated in such a questionable manner for so long. Many wondered why regulatory authorities had not intervened sooner. In response, the Financial Services Agency and the Tokyo Stock Exchange moved quickly to reassure the public that Japan's markets remained reliable. New regulations were swiftly introduced to enhance transparency and prevent similar scandals from recurring. Meanwhile, in court, Hai maintained his innocence, insisting that he had committed no illegal acts and claiming he was being unfairly targeted by Japan's establishment due to his unconventional business methods. He argued that LiveDoor's accounting practices were comparable to those of many other firms and that he was being singled out unjustly. His legal team portrayed him as a victim of Japan's traditional corporate culture, which they claimed was resistant to change and eager to punish those who challenged the status quo. However, the evidence against Hai and his associates was compelling. Prosecutors presented financial records, emails, and testimonies from former employees, all indicating that fraudulent activities had taken place within the company. Witnesses described a corporate environment where deception was encouraged, profits took precedence over ethics, and dissenters were marginalized. As the trial advanced, it became increasingly evident that Hai was unlikely to avoid conviction. Japan's legal system is known for its high conviction rate, especially in financial crime cases. Prosecutors argued that letting Hai go free would send a harmful message to other corporations and undermine confidence in Japan's financial markets. They advocated for a strong sentence aiming to serve as a warning to executives tempted to engage in similar misconduct. For many observers, the LiveDoor scandal was more than just one man's downfall. It marked a significant turning point in Japan's corporate landscape. The case underscored the urgent need for stricter oversight and greater accountability in financial markets. It also sparked broader debates about Japan's economic future, whether the country was prepared to adopt a more aggressive, dynamic approach to business or if traditional practices would continue to dominate. Some remained sympathetic to Hai, viewing him as a disruptor who challenged Japan's rigid business norms and paid a heavy price. His supporters argued that, despite mistakes, his vision for a more competitive and innovative corporate environment was desperately needed. As the trial neared its end, public interest soared, with media outlets providing extensive coverage and analysis of every development in the case. The outcome of this case was more than just a verdict for H. It set a significant precedent for how Japan would address corporate misconduct in the future. The nation watched intently, eager to see justice unfold. As Takafumi Hori's trial drew to a close, the courtroom was filled with journalists, legal experts, and members of the public, all eager to witness the fate of one of Japan's most contentious business figures. The prosecution presented a compelling case, asserting that LiveDoor's financial practices went beyond aggressive tactics. They were fundamentally deceptive. Evidence demonstrated how the company manipulated stock prices through misleading press releases and used a complex network of subsidiaries to inflate revenue figures. The prosecutors argued that such white-collar misconduct, which destabilized the stock market and caused substantial losses for investors, deserved strict punishment to uphold public confidence in Japan's financial system. Despite the mounting evidence, Hori remained resolute, refusing to admit any wrongdoing. His defense team claimed that LiveDoor's accounting methods were standard practices in Western corporations, and that Hori was being unfairly targeted for his unconventional approach and outspoken challenge to Japan's corporate traditions. They suggested that Japan's financial elite had long been waiting for an opportunity to take him down, and the scandal provided the perfect excuse. Public opinion was divided. While some still saw Hori as a rebellious innovator unfairly persecuted, many others viewed him as a symbol of greed and arrogance. The scandal had caused widespread financial damage, affecting not only wealthy investors but also everyday individuals who had trusted in Hori's vision. His refusal to accept responsibility further fueled perceptions of his hubris. In March of 2007, the court reached its decision. Hori was found guilty of securities fraud and sentenced to a little over 2 years in prison. Although the sentence was lighter than what the prosecution had requested, it still signaled a firm stance against corporate misconduct. Other executives involved in the case received prison sentences as well, with some receiving suspended terms. This verdict sent shockwaves through Japan's business community, where scandals had often been quietly managed through resignations rather than legal action. Hori's imprisonment marked a turning point, making it clear that even the most prominent figures would be held accountable for illegal activities. The case also prompted regulators to tighten corporate governance rules, aiming to prevent similar financial manipulations in the future. Following the verdict, the once promising future of Live Door unraveled dramatically. The company, once a rising star in Japan's tech scene, was delisted from the Tokyo Stock Exchange, and its assets were swiftly sold off. Employees who had believed they were part of a revolutionary enterprise poised to transform Japan's economy found themselves suddenly unemployed. Investors who had placed their savings into Live Door's stock with high hopes watched their investments evaporate. The brand that had once symbolized innovation and disruption became a byword for scandal and betrayal. Hi's rapid decline was equally striking. Once celebrated as a media favorite, gracing television programs and magazine covers, he was now a disgraced figure with a tarnished reputation. Despite appealing his conviction, his sentence was upheld, and he began serving time in 2011. For someone who had built his image on defying authority, the reality of incarceration starkly contrasted with his previous lavish lifestyle. Yet, even amid disgrace, Hi remained a controversial figure. Many saw his downfall as justified, while others admired his boldness, believing his conviction reflected Japan's resistance to change rather than true criminality. Critics pointed to other corporate scandals where executives received lighter penalties, arguing that Hi was made an example of because he challenged the establishment. After completing his prison term, Hi endeavored to restore his public image. He authored books, gave interviews, and launched new ventures, though he could never fully escape the shadow cast by the Live Door scandal. Despite everything, he stayed active in Japan's business circles, advocating for economic reform and entrepreneurship. The scandal left a profound mark on Japan's financial landscape, prompting stricter regulations, increased oversight of publicly traded companies, and a reevaluation of how corporate misconduct is prosecuted. It served as a cautionary tale about the perils of unchecked ambition and the delicate balance between aggressive business tactics and outright misconduct. For many in Japan, the case symbolized more than the fall of a single businessman. It reflected a broader struggle between tradition and innovation, integrity and greed. Although the Live Door name has long vanished from the stock market, its legacy continues to influence Japan's approach to corporate governance and financial oversight. In 2016, Australia faced a case that underscored the complexities of public health, personal responsibility, and legal intervention. The case involved Andre Chad Perrin, a 35-year-old resident of Adelaide, South Australia. Perrin was charged with endangering life after it emerged that, despite knowing his HIV-positive status, he had engaged in behaviors that risked transmitting the virus. In the late 1990s, a man living in South Australia faced serious legal and ethical questions after engaging in unprotected sex with multiple women without informing them of his health status. His case highlighted the crucial responsibilities individuals with contagious conditions bear, raising broader debates about the intersection of criminal law and public health. Originally from Cape Town, South Africa, he migrated to Australia at age 15 and eventually settled in a regional city, working as a chef and leading what appeared to be an ordinary life. However, beneath this facade, his actions would have far-reaching consequences. In September of 1998, he was diagnosed with HIV. Despite being fully aware of his condition and the risks involved, he chose not to disclose his status to his partners. Over the following years, he engaged in sexual relationships with several women without using protection, thereby exposing them to the virus. The case that drew law enforcement's attention involved 3 women, identified in court documents as Miss KC, MSMC, and MJB. Miss KC had been in a relationship with him since the early 1990s, and together they had 2 children. Unknown to her at the time, he contracted HIV during their relationship. After their separation in the year 2000, he began a new relationship with MSMC, with whom he also had unprotected sex without revealing his status. In 2001, MSMC tested positive for HIV, leading to significant personal and legal consequences. The 3rd woman, Miss JB, had a brief relationship with him in 2004. She was later informed of his HIV status by one of his previous partners, though she tested negative herself. The emotional toll of this revelation was profound for her. In January of 2006, he was brought to trial in the Supreme Court of South Australia, facing 3 counts of endangering life, reflecting the gravity of his actions. Prosecutors argued that his deliberate failure to disclose his HIV status and his engagement in unprotected sex demonstrated reckless disregard for his partner's safety. They emphasized that he was fully aware of his condition and the risks, yet prioritized his desires over their well-being. The defense challenged the case's foundation, questioning the scientific consensus on HIV and AIDS. They called witnesses associated with the Perth Group, known for denying the existence of HIV and its role in causing AIDS, claiming there was no conclusive proof that HIV existed or could be transmitted sexually. This controversial defense was met with widespread skepticism, given the overwhelming scientific evidence confirming HIV's existence and its link to AIDS. The trial attracted considerable media attention, not only because of the nature of the allegations, but also due to the broader implications for public health and legal responsibility. The case involves serious concerns not only about the offenses committed, but also about the potential consequences of misinformation spread by the defense. Public health experts warn that such claims could undermine decades of progress in HIV/AIDS education and prevention efforts. They feared that promoting false information might increase stigma and discourage individuals from seeking testing or treatment. During the trial, medical professionals testified to clarify the facts, providing evidence of HIV's existence, its transmission routes, and its role in causing AIDS. Personal stories from affected women highlighted how the defendants' actions had deeply impacted their lives. In January of 2006, the court found the defendant guilty on all charges. This verdict reinforced the importance of personal responsibility and the obligation to prevent harm to others, especially in matters related to public health. The case emphasized the legal duty of individuals with communicable diseases to disclose their status to potential partners and to take precautions to avoid transmission. Its outcome had lasting effects on both the legal and health communities in Australia, underscoring the need for ongoing education about HIV/AIDS and efforts to reduce stigma. The trial also highlighted the crucial role of the legal system in addressing cases where individuals knowingly put others at risk. It served as a reminder of the importance of relying on scientific evidence in both courtrooms and public discussions. In the years following, public health campaigns intensified, promoting regular testing, safe practices, and open communication between partners. The legal community recognized the challenge of balancing individual rights with community safety, and the case became a reference point in debates over the criminalization of disease transmission and ethical responsibilities. Ultimately, this case demonstrated how personal actions are interconnected with public health outcomes. It emphasized that each person bears responsibility not only for their own well-being, but also for the safety of the wider community. The lessons learned continue to influence policies, education, and legal frameworks aimed at preventing similar incidents. Throughout the proceedings, the courtroom atmosphere was tense as prosecutors presented a compelling case based on medical evidence, witness testimonies, and the defendant's reckless behavior over the years. The evidence depicted a man who knowingly engaged in risky conduct, endangering his partners without regard for their safety. The core issue in the case was whether Perenz's intent was to knowingly and deliberately endanger these women, or if his actions stemmed from ignorance and misunderstanding. To establish this, the prosecution called several medical experts who had treated Perenz over the years. One of the doctors who initially diagnosed him with HIV in 1998 testified about the counseling sessions Perenz had undergone after his diagnosis. The doctor explained that Perenz had been explicitly informed about the nature of HIV, how it spreads, and the precautions necessary to prevent transmission. The medical professional emphasized that there was no ambiguity. Perenz was fully aware of the risks associated with unprotected sex. Yet, despite this knowledge, he continued to engage in sexual relationships with multiple women without disclosing his condition. To underscore the seriousness of Perenz's actions, the prosecution presented the testimony of one of his victims, MSMC, who contracted HIV as a direct result of their relationship. She appeared visibly emotional as she recounted her experience, describing how she had trusted him completely and never suspected he was concealing such vital information. Her realization came only after she began experiencing symptoms and sought medical testing. When diagnosed, she was devastated, struggling to accept that the man she loved had knowingly risked her health. Her emotional account was one of the most impactful moments of the trial, as she detailed feelings of betrayal, anger, and profound sadness. She spoke about the ongoing fear, knowing her health was now permanently compromised, and described the toll on her mental and emotional well-being. She also shared the stigma she faced and the numerous medical appointments, medications, and treatments she now endured, all consequences of Perenz's recklessness. Another victim, Miss J.B., also testified. Although she had not contracted the virus, her account shed light on Perenz's pattern of deception. She explained that in a brief relationship in 2004, she engaged in unprotected sex with him without knowing his HIV status. It was only later, through a previous partner of his, that she learned the truth. Although her tests came back negative, she described the emotional turmoil she experienced, fear, anxiety, and disbelief that someone she trusted could have put her at such risk. While the prosecution's case was compelling and the evidence appeared conclusive, Perenz's defense team adopted an unconventional strategy. Instead of claiming that he had simply made a mistake or acted carelessly, they sought to challenge the very existence of HIV. Their main argument was that HIV had never been definitively proven to cause AIDS, suggesting that the entire medical consensus was questionable. The consensus surrounding the virus was rooted in flawed research. To support this claim, the defense summoned witnesses from the Perth Group, a controversial faction known for denying the established link between HIV and AIDS. These so-called experts argued that no study had ever successfully isolated the HIV virus and claimed that the tests used for diagnosis were unreliable. They asserted that what doctors identified as HIV was merely a harmless protein present in the body, suggesting that AIDS resulted from factors such as poor nutrition, substance use, or other unrelated conditions. This stance was promptly challenged by both the prosecution and the broader scientific community. Prosecutors brought forward respected virologists and epidemiologists who systematically refuted the defense's assertions. They presented decades of research, numerous studies, and compelling evidence confirming the existence of HIV and its direct connection to AIDS. The court reviewed medical reports, electron microscope images of the virus, and testimonies from dedicated researchers. The prosecution emphasized how dangerous the defense's misinformation was, as it could lead people to avoid testing, refuse treatment, or adopt risky behaviors under false assumptions that HIV was not a serious threat. While the court permitted the defense witnesses to present their views, their testimonies were largely dismissed as unreliable and misleading. Throughout the trial, Perenz remained mostly silent. When he did speak, he showed little remorse, offering no apology to his victims or acknowledgement of the harm caused. Instead, he appeared more focused on portraying himself as a victim of a flawed medical system, rather than admitting to knowingly endangering multiple women. As evidence accumulated, the case against him became overwhelming. The prosecution demonstrated beyond doubt that Perens was aware of his HIV status, had been educated on transmission prevention, yet deliberately ignored these precautions. He repeatedly lied to his partners, exposing them to a potentially life-altering disease without their knowledge or consent. The public reaction was intense, with extensive media coverage and widespread outrage over his actions. Many Australians believed that knowingly infecting others with a deadly virus was as serious as any violent crime, and calls grew for stricter laws to hold individuals accountable for knowingly spreading infectious diseases. In the final stages of the trial, legal experts considered the potential for stricter penalties, debating the broader consequences of the case. They questioned whether individuals who knowingly transmit diseases should face charges akin to attempted murder, and whether laws could be amended to impose harsher punishments for reckless endangerment. Central to the discussion was how Australia's legal and public health systems might collaborate to prevent similar incidents in the future. The prosecution concluded its case, confidently asserting that they had proven beyond a reasonable doubt that Andre Chad Perren was guilty. It was now up to the jury to determine his fate. After hours of careful deliberation, reviewing extensive evidence, including medical records confirming his HIV-positive status, victim testimonies describing their betrayal and suffering, and evidence of his blatant disregard for human life, the jury reached a verdict. The defense's attempts to challenge the scientific consensus on HIV had been decisively dismantled by overwhelming evidence, leaving the jury to decide. When the jury returned, a tense silence filled the courtroom. The foreperson announced the verdict, guilty on all counts. A wave of subdued murmurs spread among spectators, some of whom exhaled in relief after years of waiting for justice, while others remained stunned by the weight of the decision. The outcome carried profound implications, not only for Perren, but also for ongoing discussions about criminal responsibility in cases involving disease transmission. The sentencing phase quickly followed. The prosecution urged a severe penalty, emphasizing Perren's calculated, callous behavior that had permanently altered the lives of his victims. Particular focus was given to Miss SMC, who now faced lifelong medical treatment, emotional scars, social stigma, and ongoing health challenges. Her suffering underscored the gravity of his actions. Conversely, the defense sought leniency, arguing that Perren's failure to disclose his status stemmed from fear, denial, and personal struggles rather than malicious intent. They contended that he was not beyond redemption and that his background and issues should be taken into account. However, these arguments seemed hollow in light of the devastation caused. Before delivering the sentence, the judge addressed the courtroom with clarity and resolve. His words were firm. Perren's reckless actions, given his knowledge and disregard for others' safety, warranted a serious response. The court's decision reflected the need to uphold justice and protect public health, emphasizing that such behavior cannot be tolerated. Rather than acting with responsibility and integrity, you chose deception and selfishness. Your behavior caused lasting harm to those who trusted you, and the repercussions of your decisions cannot be reversed. This court must make it clear that such disregard for human well-being will not be tolerated. The sentence handed down was 15 years of imprisonment, with a non-parole period of 9 years, marking one of the longest penalties in Australia for knowingly transmitting a serious health condition. This ruling set a precedent for future cases of a similar nature, resonating within legal and public health circles alike. The verdict sparked widespread discussion, with advocacy groups viewing it as a victory for victims' rights, emphasizing the importance of accountability in cases of deliberate disease transmission. Conversely, some legal experts questioned whether incarceration was the most effective approach, suggesting that public health initiatives, education, and improved access to treatment and counseling could yield better long-term outcomes. The case also reignited debates about the stigma surrounding health conditions like HIV, highlighting concerns that criminalization might inadvertently reinforce shame and fear, discouraging individuals from seeking testing or treatment. While the trial successfully held Perens accountable, it also raised awareness of the societal barriers that hinder disclosure and health management. Striking a balance between public safety and compassion remains a complex challenge. In the years following his conviction, parents launched multiple appeals, claiming that flawed scientific evidence and bias influenced the verdict. Each appeal was denied, with courts reaffirming the strength of the evidence and the clear danger he posed to others. Meanwhile, the victims worked to rebuild their lives. Miss SMC, despite her ongoing struggles, became an advocate for awareness, using her experience to educate others about the importance of testing, treatment, and responsible disclosure. She collaborated with support organizations, sharing her story in hopes of preventing similar tragedies. The case of Perens became a significant milestone in Australian legal history, cited in subsequent proceedings involving the criminal transmission of infectious diseases. It prompted ongoing discussions about how laws should adapt to address the ethical and medical complexities of such cases, aiming to ensure justice while fostering a more informed and responsible society. As Perens served his time, he faded from public attention. The man who once believed he could evade accountability now faced the full consequences of his actions. Outside the prison walls, life moved forward, but the lessons from this case remained etched into legal and societal consciousness, shaping future approaches to similar issues. In early January of 2006, the city of Richmond, Virginia, was rocked by a series of heinous crimes that would later be called the Richmond Spree Killings. Over the course of just 1 week, 7 lives were tragically lost in 2 separate incidents, leaving the community stunned and law enforcement desperately searching for the perpetrators. The first attack unfolded on New Year's Day, when the Harvey family, Brian, his wife Catherine, and their 2 young daughters, Stella and Ruby, were found murdered in their South Richmond home. Brian was a well-known local musician, and Catherine co-owned a popular toy store, making the family well-liked and respected. Their brutal deaths shocked everyone. They had been restrained, gagged, and their throats slashed. The house was then set ablaze in an apparent attempt to destroy evidence. Investigators faced a perplexing scene with no immediate suspects or clear motives. The violence suggested a personal, calculated attack, yet the Harveys had no known enemies. Just days later, on January 6th, another grim discovery was made in a Southside Richmond residence. The bodies of Ashley Baskerville, her mother Mary Tucker, and her stepfather Pryal Tucker were found similarly restrained and suffocated, with signs of a forced entry. The striking similarities between the 2 cases led investigators to believe they were dealing with the same perpetrators. In response, police, along with state and federal agencies, launched a thorough investigation. Tips from the public quickly poured in, eventually pointing to 2 prime suspects, Ricky Javon Gray and Ray Joseph Dandridge. Both were recently released felons with violent criminal histories, and they were cousins. Their movements around the time of the murders placed them in Richmond. On January 7th, they were arrested in Philadelphia. Under interrogation, both men confessed, revealing that their primary motive was robbery. They described entering the Harvey home under the guise of asking for directions, then subduing the family, looting the house, and committing the murders. Their confessions also uncovered a broader pattern of violence, with Gray admitting to additional killings in Pennsylvania, and both suspects linked to other violent crimes across multiple states. The scale of their crime spree was staggering, illustrating a reckless pursuit of destruction with little regard for human life. The subsequent legal proceedings drew significant public attention, marking a dark chapter in the city's history. In early January of 2006, the city of Richmond was shaken by a series of tragic events that left a lasting scar on its community. The perpetrators, Ricky Javon Gray and Joseph Dandridge, were swiftly apprehended and faced severe legal consequences. Gray was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, while Dandridge received a sentence of death. Their punishments reflected the brutality of their crimes and the profound impact on the residents of Richmond. The spree killings left an indelible mark on the city's collective memory. Memorials were established to honor the victims, and the community united in mourning for those lost innocent lives. The case also sparked ongoing debates about the criminal justice system, especially regarding the rehabilitation and supervision of individuals released from incarceration. Over time, families of the victims dedicated themselves to preserving the memories of their loved ones. The music of Brian Harvey continues to be celebrated, and Catherine's toy store remains a cherished local landmark. The tragedy also prompted increased awareness and initiatives aimed at preventing such acts of violence in the future. The events of that dark period serve as a stark reminder of life's fragility and the unpredictable nature of human actions. As investigators delve deeper into the case, the horrifying extent of Gray and Dandridge's crimes became clear. Their confessions painted a chilling picture of calculated violence carried out with cold detachment. What alarmed authorities most was not only the brutality, but also the apparent lack of remorse shown by the perpetrators. Gray, in particular, revealed himself as the more sadistic of the two. He admitted that his killing spree had begun months earlier in Pennsylvania, where he murdered his own family members on November 5th of 2005. During that incident, he beat his wife Trevor to death with a pipe while under the influence of PCP, claiming he did so because she had been bothering him. His unemotional recounting of this act sent shivers through investigators, indicating a disturbing detachment from human life. Following this, Gray joined forces with Dandridge, who had recently been released from prison. The pair traveled together, committing robberies and escalating their violence. By late December of 2005, they arrived in Richmond, already prepared to commit further acts of violence without hesitation. Their crimes culminated in the brutal murder of the Harvey family. According to Gray's confession, they had been seeking an easy target when they spotted the Harveys' open garage door on New Year's Day. Posing as asking for directions, they entered the home, but once inside, Gray's demeanor changed. He decided they could not leave witnesses, and the violence that followed was both brutal and calculated. The Richmond spree killings remain a somber chapter in the city's history, reminding all of the devastating consequences of unchecked violence. As the community continues to heal, the memory of those affected persists, inspiring ongoing efforts to foster safety and understanding. On a tragic night, a family of 4 was restrained and silenced as intruders ransacked their home, seizing valuables. The assailant, Gray, then began a chilling sequence of violence, first attacking Brian and Catherine by slashing their throats. He then turned to their young daughters, 6-year-old Stella and 4-year-old Ruby, executing them in the same brutal manner. To conceal their crime, Gray and Dandridge set fire to the house and fled the scene. When authorities arrived after neighbors reported smoke, they faced a horrifying scene. The fire had not fully consumed the bodies, leaving behind evidence of a deliberate savage act rather than an accident. The local community was shattered. The Harveys were beloved. Brian, a talented musician, and Catherine, a co-owner of a popular toy store, had brought joy to many. Their loss was deeply felt, and the brutality of the crime was almost impossible to comprehend against such a kind family. Yet, the nightmare was far from over. Just 5 days later, on January 6th, Gray and Dandridge struck again, targeting Mary Tucker, her daughter Ashley Baskerville, and her husband Pryal Tucker. Unlike the Harveys, the Tuckers and Ashley were not strangers to the killers. Ashley was dating Dandridge and had allegedly acted as a lookout during previous robberies, but her loyalty did not save her from their violence. In a premeditated act, Gray and Dandridge entered the Tucker home, quickly overpowering everyone inside. They bound and gagged the victims before looting the residence. Pryal and Mary Tucker were suffocated with plastic bags, while Ashley was strangled with a belt. Investigators were stunned by the cold, methodical nature of these murders, as if the killers had established a routine, executing each act with ruthless precision. The rapid escalation from one killing to the next suggested they intended to continue indefinitely if not stopped. When news of the second massacre spread, panic gripped Richmond. 2 families had been slaughtered within a week, with no clear motive, fueling fears and mounting pressure on law enforcement to find the perpetrators. Detectives worked tirelessly, noting the similarities: binding, suffocation, arson. These clues pointed to a single group of killers. The breakthrough came when a tip identified Gray and Dandridge in the area at the time of the crimes. Surveillance footage from a nearby store confirmed their presence, bringing authorities closer to justice. In Richmond, authorities quickly identified two men with violent pasts after their backgrounds were thoroughly examined. Their pursuit led to their capture in Philadelphia on January 7th, where they were promptly taken into custody. One of the suspects, Gray, appeared unusually eager to confess, providing detailed accounts of his actions with a disturbing lack of emotion, describing how he felt during the crimes. Throughout the subsequent trial, one of Virginia's most prominent, the prosecution portrayed Gray and Dandridge as ruthless individuals who had taken innocent lives purely for their own gratification. The case against them was compelling, supported by DNA evidence from the crime scenes and their own chilling admissions. The families of the victims sat in silence, listening to the harrowing details of how their loved ones had been taken. In 2006, Gray was sentenced to death for the murders of the Harvey family, while Dandridge received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Yet, in a legal sense, justice was only part of the community's healing process, as the scars inflicted by these events would remain forever. The tragedy extended beyond the loss of life. It was the senselessness of the acts that left a deep imprint on Richmond. The victims, such as the Harveys, the Tuckers, and Ashley Baskerville, had done nothing to deserve such fates. They had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time, caught in the crossfire of two men who viewed human life as insignificant. In the aftermath, Richmond grappled with the brutal reality of what had transpired. The community was haunted not just by the number of lives lost, but by the randomness and cruelty of the murders. These were not driven by personal vendettas or gang conflicts, but were calculated acts of violence inflicted on innocent families simply because the perpetrators had the opportunity. The repercussions rippled through the city, touching many lives. The Harvey family, cherished members of the community, exemplified this loss. Brian Harvey, a talented musician, was a vital part of Richmond's cultural scene, bringing joy through his music. His wife, Catherine, was a respected small business owner, co-managing a beloved toy store that served local families. Their daughters, Stella and Ruby, had entire futures ahead of them, yet in one horrific moment, those futures were stolen. Similarly, the Tuckers and Ashley Baskerville faced tragic ends. Mary and Pyle Tucker were hard-working, well-regarded individuals, and Ashley, despite her association with a risky environment, did not deserve the fate she met at the hands of those she trusted. As the trials of Ricky Gray and Ray Dandridge drew near, the victims' families and the wider community sought closure. However, the deep wounds inflicted by these acts made healing a slow and difficult process. The evidence against the killers was overwhelming, with Gray's confessions alone being a stark testament to their guilt. Although the evidence was sufficient to establish his guilt, forensic findings also connected him directly to the crime scenes. The extreme violence of the acts, combined with Gray's complete lack of remorse, left little doubt in the jury's mind. In 2006, Gray was convicted and sentenced to death. Many believed that capital punishment was the only appropriate response for someone who had callously taken multiple innocent lives. While Dandridge was equally involved, he was not seen as the primary instigator and received a life sentence without parole. Despite these legal outcomes, the families of the victims continued to grapple with questions. Why had Gray and Dandridge targeted these specific homes? Why had they gone beyond theft to commit such slaughter? There were no clear answers, only chilling admissions from Gray about how easily he had taken lives. Over the years, efforts were made to honor the victims' memories. Catherine's toy store remained open, bringing joy to children as she always wished. Brian Harvey's music continued to be celebrated by friends and fellow musicians, ensuring his legacy endured. The city of Richmond held vigils, memorials, and community events to honor those lost and to foster unity among the affected residents. Yet the shadow of the murders persisted. The brutality had left an indelible mark not only on Richmond, but across the nation. The case drew widespread media attention, highlighting issues surrounding parole, rehabilitation, and how the justice system handles violent offenders. Gray spent many years on death row, appealing his sentence repeatedly, with his scheduled execution delayed multiple times amid ongoing legal battles. Some critics opposed the death penalty, citing concerns about its morality and effectiveness. Others, especially the victims' families, insisted that justice be fully served. On January 18, 2017, more than a decade after the crimes, Ricky Gray was executed by lethal injection at Greensville Correctional Center in Virginia. His final words were brief, and he offered no apology for the lives he had taken. For some, his execution brought a sense of closure. For others, it did little to ease the profound grief. The families of the Harveys, the Tuckers, and Ashley Baskerville would never see their loved ones again. No punishment could undo the tragedy. The Richmond spree killings remain among the most horrifying crimes in Virginia's history. The randomness of the attacks, their brutality, and the loss of both adults and young children shook the community to its core. While justice was ultimately served, the scars left behind would never fully heal. Even years later, the names of the victims evoke a quiet sadness. Their memories live on in those who loved them. Yet the tragedy also serves as a stark reminder of the devastating consequences of unchecked violence, emphasizing the importance of vigilance and justice in protecting communities. In January of 2006, a tragic incident unfolded in Hopkinton, Massachusetts, capturing national attention and leaving a community in deep sorrow. On the 20th of that month, the bodies of 27-year-old Rachel and her 9-month-old daughter, Leland, were discovered in their home, both having suffered gunshot wounds. Initially, authorities believed it to be a case of murder-suicide, but as the investigation progressed, a darker story emerged. Rachel had been found in the master bedroom with a gunshot wound to her head, while her daughter had been shot in the abdomen. A .22 caliber firearm lay nearby, leading some to speculate that Rachel might have taken her own life after killing her child. However, those close to Rachel knew her well and found this explanation unlikely. They described her as a devoted mother who adored her child and would never have harmed them. The case grew more complex when investigators learned that Rachel's husband, Neil, was absent when the bodies were found. He had left the country shortly after the murders, returning to his native England, which immediately raised suspicions. Further inquiries revealed that Neil had been facing serious financial problems, despite presenting himself as a successful computer consultant. Records showed he was unemployed and heavily in debt, prompting questions about his motives. As detectives pieced together the timeline, they discovered Neil had purchased a one-way ticket to England on the day after the murders, without attempting to contact authorities or inform them of his family's fate. Instead, he sought refuge with his parents in Nottinghamshire. This behavior intensified suspicions of his involvement. Investigators also uncovered troubling evidence of Neil's personal life. He had been engaging in online interactions with multiple women and visiting escort services, suggesting a double life far removed from the image of a caring husband and father. Forensic analysis added weight to the case against Neil. Gunshot residue was found on his clothing, and his fingerprints matched those on the firearm used in the crime. Ballistic tests confirmed the weapon was part of his father-in-law's collection, which Neil had access to. Additionally, internet searches from Neil's computer in the days before the murders included queries about how to kill someone and how to end one's life. With mounting evidence, authorities issued an international arrest warrant for Neil. British police apprehended him on February 9, 2006, and he was extradited to the United States to face charges of first-degree murder. The trial, which began in June of 2008, aimed to establish that Neil had murdered his wife and daughter in a desperate attempt to escape his financial struggles and personal issues. Throughout the trial, Neil consistently asserted his innocence, claiming that he had discovered his wife and daughter lifeless upon returning home. Overcome with shock and fear, he fled to England, hoping to escape the trauma. However, the jury remained unconvinced, and after less than 2 days of deliberation, they found him guilty on all charges. Neil was then sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, bringing a somber sense of justice for Rachel and Lillian. The case of the Entwistle family serves as a stark reminder of the hidden struggles that can exist behind closed doors and the tragic outcomes when those struggles spiral out of control. As investigators delved into the details of the murders, they meticulously reconstructed the sequence of events leading up to the devastating discovery. They examined Neil's movements and behavior both before and after the crimes, seeking clues to his involvement. Rachel and Lillian were last seen alive on the morning of January 20th, 2006, just 10 days after moving into their new home in Hopkinton, Massachusetts. The family appeared ready to begin a fresh chapter, yet behind the walls of their recently purchased house, financial difficulties, deception, and desperation lurked beneath the surface. Investigators uncovered that Neil had conducted numerous online searches in the weeks prior to the murders. His browsing history included disturbing queries about methods of killing and painless ways to end one's life. Neil later claimed these searches had been misinterpreted, but forensic experts confirmed they originated from his personal laptop, strengthening suspicions of premeditation. A major breakthrough came when detectives discovered that the firearm used in the killings, a .22 caliber handgun, had been taken from Rachel's parents' home in Carver, Massachusetts. The weapon belonged to Rachel's stepfather, Joseph Matarazzo, an avid gun owner who kept his firearms securely stored. When questioned, he was shocked to learn his gun had been used in such a crime. He had not authorized anyone to use it, nor noticed its absence until police asked him to check his collection. Forensic analysis revealed Neil's fingerprints and gunshot residue on items belonging to him, dismantling the initial theory that Rachel had killed Lillian before turning the weapon on herself. Instead, it became clear that Neil had obtained the firearm from his in-laws' residence and used it to carry out the murders of his wife and daughter before fleeing. The chilling timeline indicated that on the morning of January 20th, after Rachel had awakened and begun caring for Lillian, Neil took the gun and committed the acts. Rachel was shot at close range while lying in bed, a single bullet ending her life instantly. Lying in her mother's arms, the 9-month-old baby was tragically shot, unable to understand the chaos unfolding around her. The brutality of the act made the entire incident even more unfathomable, highlighting its shocking cruelty. After committing the murders, Neil took deliberate steps to conceal his involvement. He wrapped the bodies in blankets and increased the thermostat setting, likely to speed up decomposition and mask the scent of death. Subsequently, he turned off his mobile phone and left the residence. Surveillance footage later showed him purchasing a one-way ticket to England at Logan International Airport. His sudden departure from the United States immediately raised suspicions, as friends and family were puzzled by his absence. When authorities tried to reach him, he remained unresponsive, having made no effort to report his wife and child missing or to inquire about their well-being. Instead, he flew back to Worksop, Nottinghamshire, where he sought refuge with his parents. Meanwhile, in Massachusetts, concerned relatives grew increasingly anxious. Rachel's mother, Priscilla Matarazzo, had been trying to contact her daughter for days without success. Growing more worried, she contacted the local police to request a welfare check. On January 22nd, 2 officers arrived at the family home. From the outside, the house appeared secure, locked and without signs of forced entry or struggle. However, upon entering, a chilling silence greeted them. Moving through the residence, they eventually reached the master bedroom, where they made a horrifying discovery. Rachel and Lillian lay motionless in bed, partially covered by a blanket. At first, the scene seemed disturbingly peaceful, with no visible blood or signs of a struggle. But as the officers approached, they noticed gunshot wounds and unmistakable evidence of death. This shocking find sent ripples through the small, close-knit community of Hopkinton, a town renowned for its scenic charm and peaceful atmosphere, rarely touched by violent crime. Investigators quickly focused their attention on locating Neil, who was already their primary suspect due to his sudden disappearance. They needed concrete evidence to secure an arrest and collaborated with British authorities. Less than 3 weeks after the murders, on February 9th, 2 officers apprehended Neil in London. At his arrest, Neil appeared remarkably composed, calm, almost indifferent, further unsettling the investigators. Instead of showing grief or confusion, he seemed detached, raising suspicions about his involvement. During interrogation, Neil offered a different account of events, claiming that on the morning of January 20th, he had gone out for errands and returned home to find Rachel and Lillian dead, an explanation that seemed highly implausible given the evidence against him. Overwhelmed by fear and shock, Neil panicked and fled to England instead of reporting the tragedy to authorities. His explanations appeared suspicious. If he had truly discovered his wife and daughter's deaths, why hadn't he called for help or informed anyone, including Rachel's family? Instead, he chose to escape the country immediately, avoiding cooperation with law enforcement. Further evidence painted a damning picture of Neil's motives. Investigators uncovered that he was heavily in debt and living beyond his means, despite claiming to Rachel's relatives that he was a successful businessman. In reality, he lacked stable employment and had maxed out multiple credit cards. Additionally, he had been frequenting escort websites and engaging in explicit conversations with other women, all while maintaining the facade of a devoted husband. These financial struggles and secretive behaviors suggested a man desperate to escape his mounting responsibilities. Prosecutors argued that Neil had murdered his wife and daughter because they stood in the way of his desire for an affluent, carefree life. With Rachel gone, he could have envisioned shedding his financial burdens and starting anew. However, his impulsive attempt to flee only sealed his fate, as evidence against him continued to mount. His fingerprints were found on the murder weapon, gunshot residue was detected on his clothing, and his internet searches pointed to a premeditated intent. His sudden flight and financial motives further implicated him. The extradition process was swift, and by mid-February, Neil was returned to Massachusetts to face first-degree murder charges. The upcoming trial promised to be one of the most widely covered cases in the state's history, drawing intense media attention and public outrage. As Rachel's family mourned and prepared for the legal battle, the small town of Hopkinton grappled with the devastating loss of a young mother and her child. The tragedy shattered the illusion of safety, serving as a stark reminder that darkness can hide behind even the quietest community doors. Neil's trial commenced in June of 2008, more than 2 years after the tragic events. The courtroom was filled with journalists, legal experts, and Rachel's relatives, all seeking justice for the lives lost so brutally. The case drew national and international focus, not only because of the crime's brutality, but also due to Neil's background, a British man who had come to America seeking a new beginning, only to leave devastation in his wake. From the start, the prosecution presented a strong case portraying Neil as a manipulative individual leading a double life. Forensic evidence linked him directly to the crime scene, including gunshot residue on his clothing and fingerprints on the .22 caliber firearm used in the murders. Ballistics confirmed that the weapon had been Rachel's, further implicating him in the brutal act. Neil's stepfather's collection made it unlikely that an unknown intruder had access to the scene. Prosecutors also presented Neil's internet search history, which included disturbing queries about how to harm others and ways to end one's life, all conducted in the weeks before the tragic events. Financial records revealed Neil was deeply in debt and lacked legitimate income, despite portraying himself as a prosperous entrepreneur. In reality, he was unemployed and struggling to maintain an illusion of wealth. Legal experts argued that Neil viewed Rachel and Lillian as obstacles to his ideal lifestyle, a belief that ultimately drove him to commit the unthinkable act. One of the most damaging pieces of evidence was the timeline of events. Neil claimed he found his wife and daughter deceased and in a panic fled to England. However, phone records and flight details contradicted his story. Instead of calling emergency services, he purchased a one-way ticket and left without informing anyone of what had happened. When authorities eventually located him in England, his demeanor was cold and detached, showing no signs of grief or concern, only a calculated indifference that unsettled even veteran investigators. The defense proposed an alternative explanation, asserting that Neil had indeed discovered the bodies and fled out of shock and fear. They suggested that Rachel, suffering from postpartum depression, might have harmed Lillian before taking her own life. They also challenged the reliability of forensic evidence, arguing that gunshot residue could have transferred onto Neil's clothing through other means. Yet, these claims lacked strength against the overwhelming evidence. The prosecution emphasized that Rachel had no history of depression or suicidal tendencies. Friends and family described her as a loving mother who adored Lillian and was excited about their new home. They dismissed the idea that she would harm her child, calling such a notion both absurd and offensive. Medical examiners pointed out critical inconsistencies in the defense's theory. The positions of the bodies, the nature of the wounds, and the absence of defensive injuries all indicated that Rachel was murdered in her sleep. If she had taken her own life, the firearm would have been closer to her body. Instead, it was carefully placed aside, suggesting an attempt to stage the scene. As the trial advanced, the evidence against Neil grew more compelling. Witnesses, including former colleagues and acquaintances, testified about his character, describing him as deceitful and obsessed with projecting success. His use of escort services and explicit online searches painted a picture of a man disconnected from his responsibilities as a husband and father. Throughout the proceedings, Rachel's family endured the harrowing process, seeking justice for their loved ones. In the summer of 2008, the courtroom was filled with tense silence as the details of her final moments were revealed. Priscilla Matarazzo, Rachel's mother, was visibly overwhelmed with emotion as prosecutors displayed photographs of the crime scene and played recordings of Neil's police interviews. The pain of losing her daughter and granddaughter had left an unfillable void, and she made it clear that she believed the man responsible deserved the harshest justice. After weeks of intense testimony, the case was handed to the jury, whose deliberations lasted less than 2 days, an indication of the strength of the prosecution's case. On June 25th, the jury found Neil guilty on all counts of first-degree murder. Once regarded by the community as a devoted husband and father, Neil was now convicted of the brutal acts against his wife and child. Under Massachusetts law, a first-degree murder conviction mandated a life sentence without parole. The judge, expressing his disgust at the crime, described it as a calculated act of betrayal before sentencing Neil to life behind bars. Throughout the proceedings, Neil showed no visible emotion, remaining stoic as the verdict was read. For Rachel's family, the outcome was bittersweet. While nothing could undo their loss, they found some measure of relief in knowing justice had been served. In the years that followed, Neil attempted multiple appeals, claiming unfair trial procedures and mishandled evidence, but all were dismissed. He continued to serve his sentence in a Massachusetts correctional facility. The tragedy left a deep scar on the quiet town of Hopkinton, which had been shaken to its core. It served as a stark reminder that even those who seem perfect on the surface can harbor dark secrets, and that danger often lurks within trusted relationships. Rachel and Lillian's memories endured as their family kept their stories alive. Sharing tales of Rachel's kindness and Lillian's innocent smile, they became enduring symbols of a tragedy that should never have happened, highlighting the devastating consequences of greed, deception, and selfishness. In February of 2006, a landmark legal case unfolded across the United States, challenging the boundaries of online freedom and the limits of obscenity regulation. Karen Fletcher, a 56-year-old woman from Donora, Pennsylvania, faced 6 charges of distributing obscene materials via the internet. Her case, known as United States versus Karen Fletcher, sparked widespread debate about the First Amendment and the regulation of digital content. Fletcher operated a website called Red Rose Stories, where she posted fictional narratives depicting disturbing themes, raising complex questions about free expression and community standards in the digital age. The case involving the alleged creation and distribution of material accessible through a website required a monthly subscription fee of $10, with, at the time of indictment, a total of 29 subscribers. Unlike typical cases centered on visual depictions of inappropriate content, Fletcher's situation was distinct because it focused solely on written material. The indictment, filed by United States Attorney Mary Beth Buchanan, claimed that Fletcher's stories violated federal obscenity laws. Buchanan emphasized that obscene material is not protected by the First Amendment and described the content as extremely offensive and egregious, representing the worst possible nature of such material. Fletcher's defense attorneys argued that, Although her writings were disturbing, they constituted a form of personal expression and did not meet the legal criteria for obscenity. They pointed out that her stories resembled scenes from well-known works like Anthony Burgess's Asterisk, A Clockwork Orange Asterisk, and certain episodes of Asterisk South Park Asterisk, which are widely recognized as literary or media content. Additionally, they highlighted that Fletcher charged a fee for site access, indicating her intent was not to distribute her work broadly. Her personal history was also brought into focus. She had experienced childhood abuse and suffered from agoraphobia, a fear of public spaces. Her lawyers contended that her writings served as a form of catharsis, helping her cope with her traumatic past. In affidavits, Fletcher explained, "I have always been afraid of monsters. The monsters in my life had always been real for too long. They were always there with unlimited access to me, and I was helpless to do anything. In my stories, I have created new monsters." The case drew considerable attention from free speech advocates who expressed concern about prosecuting someone solely for written content. They warned that such actions could set a dangerous precedent for censorship and threaten First Amendment rights. As the case developed, Fletcher's mental and physical health became central issues. Her attorneys argued she was unfit for trial due to her agoraphobia and other health problems, especially given the prospect of a lengthy incarceration. In May of 2008, Fletcher accepted a plea deal, pleading guilty to one count of distributing obscene materials. Under the terms, she received 5 years of probation, including 6 months of home detention, and was ordered to surrender her computer. The resolution in United States versus Karen Fletcher left many questions unresolved. While it did not establish legal precedent, the case underscored the complexities involved in regulating online content and balancing obscenity laws with free speech protections. It also highlighted the difficulties in addressing deeply personal and unsettling expressions that, although offensive to many, can serve as a coping mechanism for individuals dealing with past trauma. Discussions surrounding the regulation of online content have grown increasingly intense, especially with the expansion of social media and platforms that host user-generated material. The case of Karen Fletcher exemplifies the complex challenge of balancing societal protection from harmful content with the fundamental right to free expression. Unlike typical obscenity cases in the United States, which often involved explicit visual material, Fletcher's legal battle centered solely on her written words. The core issue was whether fictional texts, regardless of their disturbing nature, could be deemed obscene under federal law. Fletcher's indictment, based on the same statutes historically used against visual pornography, sparked significant concern among legal experts, civil liberties advocates, and free speech supporters. To grasp the significance of this case, it's essential to understand the legal standards established by the landmark 1973 Supreme Court decision Miller v. California. This ruling set out a three-pronged test. First, whether the material appeals to prurient interests according to contemporary community standards. Second, whether it depicts or describes sexual conduct in a manner that is patently offensive as defined by law. And third, whether the work, taken as a whole, lacks serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value. Prosecutors argued that Fletcher's writings satisfied all three criteria. They claimed her stories lacked any redeeming artistic or literary merit, served solely to indulge deviant fantasies, and were so grotesque that they fell outside the protections of the First Amendment. They also highlighted that Fletcher actively distributed her work to paying subscribers, framing her activities as a commercial enterprise that facilitated the dissemination of what they labeled as obscene content. Fletcher's defense countered these claims vigorously. They pointed out that convictions based solely on written words are rare, as most obscenity cases involve visual media like photographs or videos, which have a more direct sensory impact. Literature, they argued, has historically enjoyed broader protection under the First Amendment, even when dealing with controversial or disturbing themes. They cited classic works such as Vladimir Nabokov's Asterisk Lolita Asterisk and Bret Easton Ellis's Asterisk American Psycho Asterisk, both containing graphic depictions of criminal behavior, yet remaining legally protected. Additionally, her attorneys emphasized the deeply personal nature of her writings. Evidence was presented indicating that Fletcher had experienced childhood abuse, and her story served as a means of processing that trauma. Mental health professionals submitted reports describing her struggles with severe anxiety and post-traumatic stress, framing her work as a form of personal expression and healing rather than malicious intent. Karen Fletcher's struggles with post-traumatic stress disorder and anxiety had kept her confined to her home for years, with writing serving as her main emotional outlet. A central point of contention in her case was the nature of her online audience. Prosecutors argued that by charging a subscription fee, Fletcher had created an underground marketplace for illicit material. They presented evidence suggesting that some of her subscribers had criminal backgrounds related to exploitation offenses, claiming that even if Fletcher had no malicious intent, her work fostered a culture of harmful attitudes and could potentially inspire real-world offenses. The defense responded by emphasizing that there was no proof linking Fletcher's stories to actual illegal acts. They highlighted that her website contained only fictional content with no real images or victims involved, unlike cases of child exploitation material where actual harm occurs during production. They warned that prosecuting someone solely for their creative writing could set a dangerous precedent, risking censorship of controversial literature and artistic expression. As media coverage intensified, advocacy groups such as the American Civil Liberties Union and the Electronic Frontier Foundation argued that Fletcher's prosecution represented a dangerous slide toward increased government control over online content. They questioned what prevented authorities from targeting other writers whose work was considered provocative or unsettling. Journalists pointed out that similar themes appeared in mainstream films like The Silence of the Lambs and Saw, which depict violence and psychological torment, but are protected as artistic works. The question arose, why was Fletcher being singled out? Some speculated it was because her stories involved children, a subject that provoked strong emotional reactions and hindered rational debate. Beyond legal and constitutional issues, her case raised broader societal concerns about the Internet's evolving landscape and the role of law enforcement in regulating online behavior. During the mid-2000s, social media, personal blogs, and forums allowed people to share thoughts and experiences anonymously, making the boundaries of permissible content increasingly blurry. Fletcher's website was part of this digital shift, and her prosecution underscored the difficulties in defining what should be acceptable in a world where almost anything can be published and accessed instantly. Within law enforcement circles, opinions varied. Some officials viewed her as a dangerous influence enabling harmful conduct, while others questioned whether her work truly warranted such scrutiny. Given her history of trauma, social withdrawal, and mental health struggles, many believed she needed compassionate support rather than a lengthy incarceration. Since she had never committed any violent acts or engaged in illegal activities beyond publishing her writings, her case became particularly complex. As Fletcher's trial drew nearer, pressure mounted. A conviction could result in her spending up to 30 years in federal custody. Her legal team persisted in negotiations with prosecutors, aiming for a plea agreement that might avoid such a severe sentence. Meanwhile, the case sparked widespread debate, with opinion pieces in major outlets questioning whether the government had overreached. Some commentators drew parallels to past battles over literary censorship, while others argued that her work was excessively disturbing and unworthy of legal protection. The final outcome depended on whether Fletcher was willing to risk a trial that could set a significant legal precedent. The stakes extended beyond her fate, touching on broader issues of digital freedom, obscenity laws, and the boundaries of free expression in the modern era. As the trial date approached, Fletcher faced two grim options: risk a trial with the possibility of a harsh federal sentence, or accept a plea deal that would forever label her as a criminal. Prosecutors, confident in their case, urged her to settle, warning that a trial could lead to even harsher consequences. Despite the mounting pressure, her defense team debated whether fighting for a broader legal victory was feasible. If they could prove her writings were protected under the First Amendment, it might establish an important legal standard for similar cases involving fictional content. Yet, The risks were considerable. A conviction could redefine obscenity laws, potentially criminalizing entire categories of fictional works that, while unsettling, are legally protected. Exhausted and overwhelmed by years of social isolation, Fletcher found it difficult to cope with the relentless media attention, legal complexities, and the weight of her case's national significance. Public opinion remained sharply divided. Some viewed her as a troubled individual, exploiting legal loopholes for profit, while others saw her as a symbol of free speech threatened by government overreach. A pivotal moment occurred when a forensic linguist was brought in by her defense to analyze her writings. The expert testified that, despite their grotesque nature, her stories contained elements of personal confession and trauma processing. They argued that her work, while deeply unsettling, fell within the realm of protected expression, raising questions about the boundaries of artistic and literary freedom. The case lacked the structured storytelling and deliberate provocation typical of traditional obscenity prosecutions. The authorities dismissed these arguments, asserting that the stories lacked any artistic or literary value and existed solely to satisfy a specific personal interest. They pointed out that subscribers had paid to access the content, emphasizing its commercial intent, a crucial factor in establishing obscenity under federal law. A disturbing aspect of the investigation was the nature of the website's users. At least some had prior convictions related to exploitation offenses involving minors. This fact heavily influenced public opinion against Fletcher, fueling fears that her platform had become a space where individuals with harmful tendencies could connect and indulge in such material. Even if Fletcher had not directly engaged in illegal acts beyond publishing her stories, officials argued that her work fostered an environment where dangerous fantasies could thrive. As negotiations unfolded behind closed doors, Fletcher's legal team understood that a trial posed significant risks. The jury might be unsympathetic to a woman accused of creating such disturbing content, regardless of its legal status. Public outrage over crimes against children was a powerful force that could override even strong free speech protections. Given Fletcher's fragile mental and physical condition, her attorneys feared that a maximum sentence could be fatal in custody. Ultimately, they reached a plea agreement. She would admit to 6 counts of obscenity to avoid imprisonment, instead serving house arrest, undergoing psychiatric treatment, and registering as a sex offender. For Fletcher, this was a harsh choice, but the alternative, decades in federal prison, was unacceptable. She appeared in court to formally accept the plea, with the judge acknowledging her deteriorating health and the case's complexity, while noting that the government retained the right to pursue charges related to material deemed obscene under federal law. The case's aftermath resonated through legal and literary circles. Organizations defending free expression warned that this decision set a troubling precedent, threatening to criminalize written works under obscenity statutes. While visual materials had long been subject to legal penalties, written fiction had largely remained protected until now. Some legal scholars feared that this ruling could pave the way for the government to target other controversial genres, including horror, psychological thrillers, and underground fiction that challenge moral boundaries. Despite these concerns, the general public's reaction was mostly subdued. Most people found Fletcher's work deeply unsettling, making it difficult for many to feel any sympathy or approval. Many viewed her case as a fitting response to someone who had exploited the darkest aspects of human imagination. Others argued that, while supporting free expression, certain limits should be placed on content that could inspire harmful behavior. After a plea deal, Fletcher withdrew from public life, confined herself to her home under house arrest, and retreated further into isolation. Her website was permanently shut down, and the FBI emphasized their ongoing vigilance in monitoring online spaces for similar material. This case raised a troubling question that remains unresolved. Where should society draw the line when it comes to fictional works portraying disturbing or criminal conduct? Even years later, legal experts cited the incident as a cautionary example of how digital environments and federal law can clash unpredictably. Some viewed the prosecution as a necessary adaptation by law enforcement to the evolving landscape of online content, while others saw it as an overreach that prioritized public outrage over legal principles. Ultimately, Karen Fletcher became an infamous yet obscure figure, remembered not for her identity, but for the uncomfortable questions her case prompted society to consider. In February of 2006, Australia witnessed a landmark legal proceeding that challenged the scope of its anti-terror laws. Joseph Tarrant Thomas, a 32-year-old from Melbourne, became the first person convicted under the country's new counterterrorism legislation. His case, widely covered by the media, was often called that of Jihad Jack and sparked intense debates about civil liberties, the admissibility of evidence obtained abroad, and the delicate balance between national security and individual rights. Thomas's journey into the legal spotlight began in 2001 when he traveled to Pakistan, supposedly to study Islam. During his stay, he attended a military training camp in Afghanistan linked to Al-Qaeda. He later claimed his involvement was solely religious and that he was unaware of the camp's true purpose. However, Australian authorities alleged he had deeper ties to terrorist activities, accusing him of receiving funds from senior Al-Qaeda members and possessing a forged passport to facilitate potential attacks upon his return. In 2003, Thomas was arrested and charged under anti-terror laws. The prosecution's case relied heavily on interviews conducted by Pakistani intelligence, during which Thomas allegedly admitted to his association with Al-Qaeda and acknowledged receiving $3,500 from a high-ranking operative. These confessions became central to the legal proceedings that followed. In 2006, prosecutors relied heavily on Thomas's confessions, asserting they revealed a clear intent to participate in terrorist activities and that his possession of a counterfeit passport indicated plans to travel covertly for malicious purposes. The defense, however, challenged the legality of these confessions, arguing they were extracted under coercive conditions that infringed upon Thomas's rights. They pointed to the oppressive environment of Pakistani detention facilities and the lack of legal representation during interrogations. Despite these objections, a jury in February of that year convicted Thomas of receiving funds from a terrorist organization and possessing a false passport, though he was acquitted of more serious charges involving resource provision to terrorists. This marked Australia's first conviction under its anti-terrorism legislation and was seen by some as a significant step for national security. Thomas was sentenced to 5 years in prison with a minimum non-parole period of 2 years. Yet his legal journey was far from over. His defense team appealed, arguing that the trial court erred in admitting the confessions, claiming they were not voluntary and that their inclusion breached fairness and justice principles. In August, the Victorian Court of Appeal agreed, ruling the confessions inadmissible due to the circumstances under which they were obtained. The court ordered a new trial but released Thomas on bail while proceedings continued. His case highlighted the complexities of prosecuting terrorism-related offenses, especially when evidence is gathered abroad under different legal standards. It underscored the delicate balance between safeguarding national security and protecting individual rights. The proceedings also prompted broader discussions in Australia about the scope of anti-terror laws, the treatment of citizens accused of terrorism overseas, and the evidentiary standards necessary for convictions. In the years following his release, Thomas faced additional legal measures, including control orders and further proceedings. His case remains a landmark in Australian legal history, exemplifying the ongoing tension between security efforts and civil liberties in the post-9/11 era. While in custody after his 2006 conviction, his legal team was already preparing an appeal, challenging the legitimacy of the evidence, particularly the confessions obtained during his detention in Pakistan. Ultimately, this appeal led to the overturning of his conviction, emphasizing that the confessions had been obtained under circumstances that violated fundamental fairness and due process. Before the appeal could proceed, Thomas found himself at the heart of a heated national debate over the delicate balance between security and individual freedoms. The media quickly seized upon his case, sensationalizing headlines that labeled him Jihad Jack, a nickname that had first appeared in Australian tabloids. To some, he was a dangerous figure who had trained with Al-Qaeda, accepted money from terrorists, and was plotting something sinister. To others, he was simply a misguided young man who had made poor choices but did not pose a genuine threat to national safety. Thomas's conviction under newly enacted anti-terror laws intensified the controversy, prompting legal experts to question whether these laws were being applied too broadly. A key issue was the legality of his confessions. The defense argued that these statements had been obtained while he was in the custody of Pakistani intelligence, known for its rigorous interrogation methods. They claimed Thomas had been detained for months in secret locations, often held in solitary confinement, and questioned without access to legal representation. His lawyers argued that such conditions amounted to psychological coercion, and that his confessions, admitting to receiving $3,500 from an al-Qaeda operative and possessing a fraudulent passport, were obtained under duress. The prosecution, however, maintained that the confessions were legitimate. They contended there was no evidence of mistreatment and that Thomas had spoken freely during recorded interrogations. They argued that accepting money from a terrorist organization and possessing a false passport demonstrated intent to engage in clandestine activities. For the government, Thomas's conviction was a pivotal test of Australia's anti-terror laws, introduced after the September 11th attacks and the Bali bombings in 2002. Throughout the legal debate, Thomas's family insisted on his innocence. His wife, whom he had met in Pakistan, spoke publicly about the emotional toll the trial had inflicted on their family. She described how the community had ostracized them, how Thomas's name had become synonymous with terrorism, and how their children would carry the burden of their father's conviction. Behind the scenes, intelligence agencies continued to scrutinize Thomas's connections. Although he had been convicted of accepting funds from al-Qaeda, there was no evidence he had planned or participated in any attack. Some law enforcement officials believed he was more of an ideological supporter than an operational member of the organization. Nevertheless, the prevailing political climate left little room for nuance, treating any association with al-Qaeda as a grave threat to national security. As months went by, Thomas's legal team worked tirelessly to challenge the case, but the broader atmosphere of suspicion and security concerns overshadowed the complexities of his situation. In their appeal, the defendants argued that their confessions were obtained under coercive conditions and that admitting such statements in an Australian court set a troubling precedent. They contended that if the government could rely on confessions extracted from a detainee in a foreign prison without the protections afforded by Australian law, then similar practices could be applied to other cases in the future. The Victorian Court of Appeal agreed to hear the case, and a tense courtroom filled with journalists, civil rights advocates, and government representatives listened as the legal arguments unfolded. The judge's primary task was to determine whether Thomas's confessions had been given voluntarily or if his detention conditions had compromised their reliability. During the proceedings, international law experts testified about Pakistani intelligence practices, describing how detainees often faced prolonged solitary confinement, lacked access to legal counsel, and were pressured into making statements that served interrogators' interests. Although Thomas had not reported any physical mistreatment, his lawyers argued that the threat of indefinite detention in a foreign country without legal recourse was enough to undermine the credibility of his confessions. In August of 2006, the Victorian Court of Appeal ruled in favor of Thomas. The judges concluded that the confessions obtained during his detention in Pakistan should never have been admitted as evidence. They agreed with the defense that the oppressive conditions under which the statements were made rendered them inadmissible. Consequently, Thomas's convictions were overturned and he was released from custody. This decision ignited a swift political reaction. Conservative politicians and law enforcement officials criticized the ruling, warning it set a dangerous precedent that could hinder efforts to prosecute individuals suspected of terrorism. They argued that the legal system had created a loophole allowing dangerous individuals to escape justice simply because their confessions were obtained abroad. Conversely, civil rights advocates hailed the verdict as a victory for fairness and the rule of law, emphasizing that courts must not rely on coerced statements to secure convictions. Legal scholars pointed out that Thomas's case revealed significant flaws in Australia's counterterrorism legislation, which they believed had been hastily drafted in response to global security concerns, often at the expense of individual rights. Despite his legal victory, Thomas's troubles were far from over. Although his criminal conviction was nullified, the government was reluctant to let him fade from public view. Soon, he was subjected to a control order, a strict legal measure imposing severe restrictions on his movements and activities. Following his release from prison, Joseph Thomas's life remained under intense scrutiny as the government continued to impose strict restrictions. These measures included curfews, reporting obligations, and bans on communicating with certain individuals. Authorities justified these controls by asserting that Thomas still posed a potential threat to national security, citing intelligence reports that claimed he had trained with al-Qaeda and received funds from terrorist networks. Even though his confession could no longer serve as legal evidence, officials maintained that these precautions were necessary to prevent any future involvement in activities that might endanger the country. For Thomas, these ongoing restrictions felt like an unending punishment. Despite having his conviction overturned, he struggled to rebuild his life, facing significant barriers to employment and social reintegration. The stigma of his trial and the persistent association with the nickname Jihad Jack continued to shadow him, making it difficult to move past the case that had come to define his public identity. Meanwhile, the legal and political debates surrounding his case underscored its significance as a turning point in Australian counterterrorism legislation. It tested the boundaries of government authority in prosecuting individuals suspected of terrorist links and raised critical questions about the admissibility of foreign-sourced confessions in domestic courts. The outcome of his appeal established a legal precedent that would influence future discussions on national security, human rights, and the rule of law. Despite his release, the government's suspicion lingered, and Thomas remained under a control order that dictated nearly every aspect of his daily life. He was restricted from traveling beyond designated areas without permission, required to report regularly to authorities, and forbidden from using certain communication devices or contacting specific individuals, many of whom were never publicly identified. Any attempt to reach out to these persons risked severe penalties. Media coverage continued to follow his movements closely, and the label Jihad Jack proved difficult to shed. Employers hesitated to hire him, fearing negative associations, while friends and acquaintances distanced themselves, concerned that contact might attract law enforcement attention. The stigma extended to his family as well. His wife, who had supported him throughout, faced hostility from neighbors, and their children endured whispers and judgment at school. Thomas challenged the control order, arguing that it amounted to indefinite punishment without a fair trial. His legal team contended that the restrictions were unreasonable, especially given the fact that his conviction had been overturned and no new charges had been filed. Civil liberties organizations also expressed concern, warning that such measures set a dangerous precedent by allowing governments to impose restrictions that severely limit personal freedoms without due process. Despite efforts to impose strict restrictions on individuals without the need to prove guilt in court, authorities in Australia upheld a control order against Thomas, citing sufficient grounds to consider him a security threat. This decision reinforced the extensive powers granted to security agencies under the nation's anti-terrorism legislation and highlighted the difficulties faced by those who, despite being legally cleared, remained under suspicion in the eyes of the state. As years went by, Thomas sought to retreat from public attention, relocating to regional Victoria in hopes of living a quieter life away from relentless media scrutiny. Yet, his past continued to follow him, and community members, aware of his history, remained cautious. Attempts to rebuild his life were consistently hindered by lingering stigma, as the label of being Australia's first convicted terrorist persisted even after the court's later ruling. Meanwhile, his case sparked ongoing debate within legal and political circles, becoming a reference point in discussions about the limits of counterterrorism laws, the admissibility of evidence obtained abroad, and the importance of civil liberties. Legal experts warned of the dangers inherent in relying on confessions extracted in foreign detention centers, while security officials argued that his original conviction was justified based on intelligence from international agencies. Thomas's case underscored the complex balance between national security and justice, illustrating how accusations could cast a long shadow over an individual's life, even when the legal system ultimately cleared them. After his release, he rarely spoke publicly, preferring to avoid media attention. In rare interviews, he expressed regret over his decision to travel to Afghanistan, but insisted he had no intention of causing harm. He explained that his time in Pakistan was driven by religious study, not terrorism, and that he was caught up in circumstances beyond his control. For many Australians, however, his story served as a stark reminder of how easily a person's life could be disrupted in a post-9/11 world where mere associations could lead to severe consequences. Despite legal victories, Thomas remained largely a prisoner of his past. His movements were monitored, his name forever linked to security concerns, and his future uncertain. The control orders he faced were periodically reviewed, with authorities consistently justifying their continuation. Once hopeful of returning to normal life, Thomas gradually accepted that his reputation and circumstances had been permanently altered, shaped by a climate of heightened vigilance and suspicion. Throughout the years, the notion of true freedom for him remained elusive, as the evolving landscape of Australia's counterterrorism efforts continued to shape the nation's security policies. New legislation was regularly introduced, and emerging cases kept the debate alive, reflecting shifting priorities in response to global events. Yet, among these developments, the case of Joseph Thomas stood out as one of the most pivotal in the country's legal history. It exemplified the intricate challenges involved in prosecuting terrorism-related offenses, highlighting the delicate balance between safeguarding national security and upholding justice. The profound, irreversible effects of such accusations on an individual's life became painfully evident as his control orders were eventually lifted. By that point, the damage was already inflicted. His reputation, family life, and future prospects had been permanently altered. Whether or not he had genuinely posed a threat was no longer the primary concern. Public perception had already cemented him as a symbol of Australia's ongoing struggle to navigate the complex waters of counterterrorism amid global fears and suspicion. In a different part of the world, Indonesia faced a high-profile murder case in 2006 that drew widespread attention both nationally and internationally. The assassination of Munir Said Talib, a prominent human rights advocate, shocked the nation and underscored the dangers faced by activists challenging powerful institutions. Munir was renowned for his courageous stance against military abuses and his role in establishing the Commission for the Disappeared and Victims of Violence. His untimely death cast a stark light on the risks faced by those fighting for justice in Indonesia's often perilous political environment. On September 7, 2004, Munir boarded a Garuda Indonesia flight from Jakarta to Amsterdam, with a layover in Singapore. Unbeknownst to him, this journey would be his last. During the flight, Munir began experiencing severe symptoms, including vomiting and intense pain. Despite efforts by the crew and a doctor on board, his condition worsened rapidly, and he passed away before the plane reached its destination. An autopsy conducted by Dutch authorities revealed that Munir had been poisoned with a lethal dose of arsenic. The discovery of this toxic substance immediately raised suspicions of foul play, prompting both national and international calls for a thorough investigation. The Indonesian government, led by President Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono, faced mounting pressure to identify those responsible. Investigations soon pointed to Polikarpus Budari Prianto, a Garuda pilot who was off duty at the time but had been assigned to the flight in a non-flying capacity. Evidence showed that Polikarpus had offered his business class seat to Munir, placing the activist in a position where he could be more easily targeted. Phone records revealed an unusual number of calls between Polikarpus and officials from Indonesia's state intelligence agency in the days leading up to the incident. By December of the following year, further developments indicated that the investigation was intensifying as authorities sought to uncover the full extent of the conspiracy behind Munir's tragic death. In a case marked by legal twists and intense controversy, an individual was initially found guilty of conspiracy to commit a serious crime and sentenced to 14 years in prison. This verdict was confirmed by an appellate court in April of 2006. However, the case took a significant turn later that year when, in October, the Supreme Court annulled the conviction due to a lack of sufficient evidence, leading to the individual's release. The Attorney General's office responded by seeking a judicial review, and in January of 2008, the Supreme Court reinstated the conviction, this time imposing a 20-year sentence. Throughout these proceedings, widespread criticism emerged from human rights groups who saw the initial acquittal as a setback in efforts to combat impunity. The case highlighted the difficulties faced by Indonesia's judicial system, especially when holding powerful actors accountable. The shifting verdicts underscored the complexities and vulnerabilities involved in prosecuting cases linked to influential institutions. During the investigation and trial, persistent allegations suggested that higher-level officials might have been involved. Observers and activists speculated that the crime was not the act of a lone individual, but potentially part of a coordinated effort to silence a prominent critic of the military and government. Despite these suspicions, no senior officials faced conviction, fueling ongoing debates about possible state complicity and the obstacles to justice in such sensitive cases. This case had a profound impact on Indonesia's human rights environment, serving as a stark reminder of the risks faced by those who challenge powerful entities and seek justice. It also galvanized civil society, prompting increased calls for transparency, accountability, and reforms within the intelligence and judicial sectors. In the years following, the individual's legacy continued to inspire human rights initiatives across Indonesia. Organizations established in his memory carried forward his mission to defend marginalized groups and ensure accountability for abuses. The case remains a significant reference point in discussions about justice and human rights in the country, symbolizing both progress and ongoing challenges in upholding the rule of law. The events surrounding the initial incident in 2004 and the subsequent legal battles culminated in 2006, marking a pivotal chapter in Indonesia's history. The case not only exposed the dangers faced by human rights advocates, but also revealed systemic issues within national institutions. It emphasized the importance of vigilance, advocacy, and reform to guarantee justice and protect citizens' rights. In 2006, as pressure from domestic and international human rights groups increased, investigations into the circumstances of the incident gained momentum. The discovery that poisoning was the cause of death added another layer of complexity, underscoring the need for continued scrutiny and justice. The incident was neither a natural occurrence nor a chance event. It was a deliberate, carefully planned act. The key question remained: who was behind it and what motivated such a decision? As Indonesia's legal authorities began to unravel the complex case, many believed that Muni's unwavering activism against military misconduct and corruption had made him a prime target. His efforts to expose abuses committed by military and intelligence officials had implicated high-ranking figures within Indonesia's security apparatus. Evidence against Polikarpus Budari Prianto, a pilot for Garuda Indonesia, appeared strong but was not entirely conclusive. Investigators uncovered that Polikarpus had made several phone calls to individuals connected to Indonesia's state intelligence agency in the days before Muni's departure. These calls, made from his personal phone, linked him to senior intelligence officers, raising serious questions about whether he acted alone or as part of a broader operation. Nonetheless, establishing a direct connection between these conversations and the act itself proved difficult in court. Prosecutors argued that Polikarpus played a crucial role in facilitating Muni's poisoning. Forensic analysis and witness testimonies indicated that Munir likely ingested arsenic during the flight, possibly through contaminated food or drink. A suspicious detail emerged shortly after takeoff. Polikarpus, who was supposed to be off duty, offered his business class seat to Munir. This move, seemingly generous, was viewed by investigators as a calculated step to isolate Munir from most passengers and crew, making it easier for the poisoning to go unnoticed. Further scrutiny revealed that Polycarpus had used a forged assignment letter from Garuda Indonesia's security division to justify his presence on the flight. This fraudulent document suggested that his involvement was deliberate and not incidental. The prosecution argued that he had been planted on the plane to ensure the assassination's success. However, proving that Polycarpus directly administered the poison was challenging, as no witnesses could confirm his contact with Muniez's food or drink. By mid-2006, Polycarpus's trial had become one of Indonesia's most significant legal cases. The courtroom was crowded with journalists, human rights advocates, and representatives from both local and international organizations. Public interest was intense, driven by fears that powerful interests might interfere with justice. Muniez's widow, Suswati, played a vital role in maintaining momentum, persistently demanding accountability and refusing to accept her husband's death as an isolated act. Alongside other rights groups, she continued to emphasize the importance of uncovering the truth behind the assassination. Despite growing public concern, investigations into Bin's involvement revealed numerous inconsistencies and delays. Polycarpus's defense team vigorously challenged the evidence, arguing that there was no definitive proof linking him directly to Muniez's death. They pointed out that although the phone records appeared suspicious, they did not confirm a coordinated plot. Furthermore, they highlighted that other passengers and crew members had access to the same substance used, yet only Muniez fell ill, suggesting the poison might have been administered before he boarded the flight. In August of 2006, the court delivered its verdict. Polycarpus was convicted of premeditated conspiracy to commit murder and sentenced to 14 years behind bars. While initially seen as a step toward justice, many remained dissatisfied. Critics contended that Polycarpus was merely a small part of a much larger scheme that had yet to be fully uncovered. The case drew mixed reactions. On one side, it was rare for someone connected to an intelligence agency to be convicted of a political killing in Indonesia. On the other, the failure to hold higher-ranking officials accountable fueled skepticism about the government's dedication to justice. Most believed that the order for Muniez's killing originated from a higher level, but institutional obstacles prevented the true masterminds from facing trial. As the year drew to a close, calls for further investigation intensified. Human rights organizations and Muniez's supporters demanded the government take stronger action to reveal the full extent of Bin's involvement. The case exposed serious flaws within Indonesia's law enforcement and judicial systems, underscoring the difficulty of prosecuting cases implicating state institutions. In late 2006, the Supreme Court announced it would review Polycarpus's conviction, signaling that the legal process was far from finished. With mounting public pressure, the next phase would determine whether genuine justice could be achieved. Despite Polycarpus's conviction, many believed he was only a key figure in a broader conspiracy. The assassination had shaken Indonesia, and pressure from civil society, human rights groups, and the international community continued to grow. People demanded answers. Who ordered the attack? Why was Muniez targeted so ruthlessly? And most critically, why was justice progressing so slowly? The Indonesian government, led by President Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono, publicly committed to resolving the case. Yet, behind the scenes, progress remained frustratingly sluggish. While Polycarpus had been convicted, no decisive action had been taken against the senior officials within Indonesia's intelligence agency, known as B. Despite the overwhelming evidence, the pursuit of accountability for those at the top continued to face significant obstacles. Circumstantial evidence, including phone records, witness testimonies, and leaked documents, strongly indicated that Polycarpus had maintained communication with senior officials from Ben both before and after Muniez's death. Despite these clues, no arrests were made, and the deeper layers of the conspiracy remained unexamined. In October, DV Tisiachi Shest, Polycarpus's conviction was unexpectedly overturned by the Supreme Court, a ruling that shocked many observers. The court's decision appeared to suggest that even in a high-profile case, holding powerful individuals accountable could be elusive. The ruling emphasized the absence of direct evidence proving Polycarpus personally administered the arsenic, despite his presence on the flight, his links to Ben, and suspicious travel documents. The court concluded that these factors alone did not suffice for a murder conviction, fueling suspicions that influential figures behind the scenes were working to shield themselves from exposure. Muniez's family and human rights advocates responded swiftly. His widow, Suswati, along with various organizations, launched a persistent campaign to challenge the ruling and seek a comprehensive judicial review. They accused the court of succumbing to political influence and urged the public to demand justice. Indonesian media, which had closely followed the case, published investigative reports and editorials to maintain pressure on authorities. Calls grew for the formation of an independent commission to further probe the involvement of beneficials, but these efforts faced significant obstacles at every level. As the legal process dragged on, new evidence gradually surfaced. In late DV TCH Chest, leaked intelligence documents revealed that the planning of Muniez's assassination was extensive, involving multiple operatives and layers of secrecy. An anonymous former beneficial claimed Muniez was considered a national threat due to his outspoken criticism of military abuses, and that the decision to eliminate him originated from the highest levels of intelligence. However, without concrete proof or a whistleblower willing to come forward, these claims remained speculative. The international community closely monitored the case. Several foreign governments, including the Netherlands, where Muniez had been traveling for further studies, urged Indonesia to pursue full accountability. Human rights organizations such as Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch issued statements condemning the slow progress of justice and calling for greater transparency. The case had evolved beyond a single individual's death, becoming a symbol of Indonesia's ongoing struggle for human rights and justice. In response to mounting public pressure, the Indonesian Attorney General's office filed for a judicial review of Polikarpus's case in late DVA TCH Chest. This move was widely seen as a concession to public demand, rekindling hope that justice might ultimately be served. In late DV TCH Chest, the pursuit of justice for a high-profile case remained intense and unresolved. The prosecution pressed for the reinstatement of Polikarpus's conviction, emphasizing new evidence that connected him to operatives linked to B. The case was slated for review in early DVE TCH Sam, sparking widespread speculation about whether the legal system would finally hold all those responsible accountable by the year's end. Throughout Indonesia, society remained divided. Some viewed Polikarpus's initial conviction as a positive step, while others saw his temporary release as evidence of potential manipulation within the justice process. The core question, who within the government authorized the assassination, remained unanswered. This struggle for justice extended beyond the case itself. It symbolized a broader fight against a long-standing culture of impunity that had undermined Indonesia's political and military institutions. The killing of Muniez had transcended mere criminality, becoming a pivotal moment in the nation's democratic development. The outcome would set a crucial precedent for how Indonesia confronted political violence and state-sponsored repression. If those responsible could evade punishment despite clear evidence, it would send a dangerous message to activists, journalists, and citizens that speaking out against power still carried severe risks. As the year drew to a close, supporters of Suswati and Muniez vowed to persist in their efforts. Public demonstrations, rallies, and campaigns continued unabated, ensuring that the case remained in the national consciousness. Though justice for Muniez had yet to be fully achieved, his reputation as a courageous defender of human rights was firmly cemented, and his legacy endured as a symbol of resistance. Meanwhile, in the year 2000, Germany was rocked by a series of brutal crimes exposing deep-rooted issues of racism and xenophobia. Among the most tragic was the murder of Alberto Adriano, a 39-year-old man originally from Mozambique who had made Germany his home. Arriving in East Germany in 1988 as a contract worker, Alberto sought better prospects for himself and his family. He settled in Dessau, found employment at a meat processing plant, and built a life with his partner and their 3 children. Known for his hard work and dedication, Alberto aimed to provide a stable future for his loved ones. On the evening of June 10, 2000, Alberto watched the opening match of UEFA Euro 2000 with friends. The night was filled with camaraderie and shared excitement typical of football gatherings. As the evening progressed, Alberto decided to return home, a short 400 meters away, passing through Dessau City Park, a route he had taken many times before without incident. Unbeknownst to him, 3 young men, Enrio, Frank, and Christian, aged between 16 and 24, were also in the park that night. These individuals, heavily intoxicated and driven by neo-Nazi beliefs, had missed their train home. Fueled by alcohol and extremist ideology, they roamed the park shouting far-right slogans, including references to Hitler, their voices echoing through the night. One quiet night, as Alberto strolled through the park, he unexpectedly encountered a group of men. What followed was a brutal act of violence driven solely by racial hatred. The 3 assailants attacked him without warning, beating him relentlessly and knocking him to the ground. They continued their assault by stomping on his head multiple times, leaving Alberto severely injured and unconscious. Passers-by discovered his battered body and immediately called emergency services. He was rushed to the hospital, where medical teams fought tirelessly to save him. Despite their efforts, his injuries were too grave, and after lingering in a coma for 3 days, Alberto Adriano succumbed to his wounds on June 13, 2000. The news of his death shocked the nation. The brutality of the attack, motivated by racial prejudice, forced Germany to confront the unsettling presence of far-right extremism within its borders. Public outrage was widespread, with citizens and officials condemning the violence. During the trial, it was revealed that the 3 perpetrators had known ties to neo-Nazi groups and a history of racist acts. Their defense was minimal, and the evidence against them was compelling. Sirel H, identified as the main attacker, received a life sentence for his role, while Frank M. and Chris, both minors, were sentenced to 9 years in juvenile detention. Following the verdict, then-Chancellor Gerhard Schroeder attended Alberto's funeral, emphasizing the seriousness of the crime and the nation's need to confront its darker tendencies. Alberto's murder was not an isolated event. Between 2000 and 2007, Germany faced a series of racially motivated killings carried out by the National Socialist Underground, a neo-Nazi terrorist organization. This clandestine group primarily targeted immigrants of Turkish descent, leaving 10 people dead and many wounded. Their activities went unnoticed for years, raising troubling questions about institutional bias and law enforcement's ability to address far-right extremism effectively. The killing of Alberto Adriano and the revelations about the NSU served as stark reminders of the ongoing threat posed by neo-Nazi ideologies in Germany. These tragedies prompted national reflection and spurred numerous initiatives to combat racism and foster integration. Memorials were established in honor of the victims, educational programs launched to address xenophobia, and authorities intensified efforts to dismantle extremist networks. Yet the scars left by these events remain deep, underscoring the enduring challenge of confronting hatred and intolerance. The events of the year 2000 and the subsequent years exposed the fragile fabric of social unity and underscored the necessity of remaining vigilant against all forms of hostility. The tragic death of Alberto Adriano stands as a stark reminder of the devastating toll that unchecked prejudice can take, emphasizing the ongoing need for a society founded on tolerance and mutual respect. Since then, Germany has made notable progress in confronting these issues, yet challenges persist. The emergence of far-right movements and occasional incidents of racially motivated violence reveal that the struggle against extremism remains unresolved. Alberto Adriano's story continues to serve as a powerful symbol of the human cost of intolerance and the importance of sustained efforts toward justice and equality. His murder sent shockwaves through the country, sparking widespread discussions about racism, xenophobia, and the nation's ongoing confrontation with its darker history. Although Germany has taken steps to address its past, the brutal killing in 2000 revealed that deep-rooted prejudices still linger, challenging the notion that such attitudes are relics of a bygone era. The image of a defenseless man being assaulted in a public park by 3 young men driven solely by racial animosity forced the nation to face an uncomfortable truth. Extremism was not only present but actively thriving in certain communities. In the city of Dessau, which was still struggling with economic difficulties following reunification, the murder unearthed existing tensions. Long-standing issues like unemployment and social discontent created fertile ground for radical ideas to take root. While many residents were appalled and participated in vigils and protests, others quietly sympathized with the perpetrators. In the weeks after the attack, graffiti with far-right slogans appeared in some neighborhoods, a chilling sign that some viewed Alberto's death as an act of defiance rather than a heinous crime. For Alberto's family, the loss was beyond measure. His wife, overwhelmed with grief, struggled to explain to their young children why their father would never return. Though they were too young to grasp the full extent of what had happened, they could feel the pain radiating from their mother and from the mourners who gathered in their home. Media coverage reduced their father's life to headlines about violence and hatred, forever altering their world. They learned painfully that he had been targeted simply for being different. As the trial of the perpetrators commenced, Germany's justice system faced intense scrutiny. Many feared that, as in previous hate crime cases, the young men might receive lenient sentences. Historically, crimes driven by far-right ideology had often been minimized, with authorities hesitant to fully acknowledge the extent of neo-Nazi influence. However, this time, the public was closely watching, and the case drew international attention, with human rights organizations and foreign governments expressing concern over the potential for justice. During a highly anticipated trial, the courtroom was filled with journalists, activists, and community leaders eager to see how justice would be served for a brutal act of violence. As the prosecution presented its case, the severity of the assault became even more striking. Witnesses recounted hearing the attackers shouting racist slurs while kicking and stomping on Alberto, illustrating the malicious intent behind the attack. Forensic experts detailed the extensive injuries Alberto sustained, highlighting that the force used was so extreme it fractured bones and caused irreversible brain damage. The violence was not merely excessive, it was cruel and sadistic. The defense attempted to downplay the incident, claiming the perpetrators had been intoxicated and unaware of their actions. They portrayed the young men as misguided youths, lost in a haze of alcohol and reckless behavior. However, this argument failed to sway public opinion. It was well known that these individuals had a history of far-right associations. They had attended rallies promoting extremist views, openly expressed racist sentiments, and had previously harassed immigrants in their neighborhood. This was not an isolated act, but the tragic culmination of years of deep-seated hatred. As the trial advanced, it became evident that Germany was at a crossroads. The case was about more than 3 individuals. It reflected a broader societal issue. How could young men, born long after the end of World War II and the fall of the Third Reich, still harbor such intense racial animosity? How had extremist ideologies persisted into modern Germany? Chancellor Gerhard Schroeder's presence at Alberto's funeral was seen as a symbolic gesture, acknowledging the need for stronger efforts to combat racism. He called for tougher measures against hate groups and urged society to confront its shortcomings. For activists and minority communities, words alone were insufficient. They demanded concrete actions, increased protections for immigrants, harsher penalties for hate crimes, and a determined effort to dismantle far-right organizations. When the verdict was announced, the court sentenced Sirel H., the main perpetrator, to life imprisonment. His 2 younger accomplices received 9-year sentences in juvenile detention. The ruling brought a mixture of relief and skepticism. Many believed it was a step toward justice, yet questioned whether it would truly deter future violence. After all, the problem extended beyond these individuals, rooted deeply in societal attitudes. In the months following Alberto's murder, discussions about racism intensified. Schools introduced new anti-racism initiatives, communities organized outreach programs, and law enforcement agencies pledged to target extremist groups more aggressively. Yet despite these efforts, signs of the ongoing challenge persisted. Neo-Nazi gatherings still took place in certain regions, hate crimes continued to be reported, and nationalist rhetoric gained ground in political discourse. Alberto's case served as a stark reminder of how deeply rooted intolerance remained in society. In the courtroom, the pursuit of justice offered little solace to Alberto's family. His children would grow up without a father, and his wife would carry the burden of that loss forever. Alberto's name became forever linked to one of Germany's most infamous acts of hatred, a tragic chapter rooted in prejudice. He had come to Germany seeking opportunity, dreaming of a brighter future, but his life was abruptly ended by intolerance, leaving behind a legacy that the nation would grapple with for years. The lessons from Alberto's murder were painfully clear. Racism was not merely a relic of the past, and complacency allowed it to persist and fester. Although Germany had made notable progress in confronting its history, the resurgence of extremism in recent times proved that the fight against hatred was far from over. Remembering past atrocities was not enough. Society needed to actively oppose the forces seeking to revive them. The park where Alberto was attacked transformed into a site of remembrance, with a memorial erected in his honor, serving as a stark reminder of that tragic night in June. Yet, beyond these symbols, the true challenge lay in whether Germany would take meaningful, lasting steps to prevent such tragedies from recurring. In the years following Alberto's death, the nation found itself at a crossroads. The brutality of the crime shocked the country into recognizing the ongoing presence of racism within its borders. But acknowledgement alone was insufficient. The pressing question was what concrete actions would be taken to safeguard the future. In response, politicians made promises, anti-racism groups gained momentum, and law enforcement committed to tackling far-right extremism more vigorously. Candlelight vigils became annual events, serving as communal acts of remembrance and reaffirmation of the fight against hate. Educational programs aimed at early childhood sought to dismantle prejudice, emphasizing the dangers of xenophobia and the importance of inclusion. Despite these efforts, hatred persisted, violent incidents continued to make headlines, and extremist factions found new avenues to spread their messages. The rise of digital platforms created fertile ground for radicalization, with online forums and social media enabling hate speech to flourish in ways difficult to monitor. Right-wing political movements gained strength, their leaders exploiting economic hardships and nationalist sentiments to advance their agendas. It became evident that, while laws could be enhanced and awareness raised, the battle against hatred demanded constant vigilance. For Alberto's family, no political debate or social initiative could undo their loss. His wife struggled to rebuild her life, raising their children alone, haunted by the senseless violence that ended her husband's life. Their children, too young at the time to fully grasp the tragedy, grew up bearing the emotional weight of their father's fate, learning about his death as a profound personal loss intertwined with a broader societal challenge. As part of Germany's ongoing confrontation with racial intolerance, some members of the Mozambique community viewed Alberto Adriano's tragic death as a stark reminder that, despite their efforts and contributions, they would always be perceived as outsiders by certain segments of society. Many had come to Germany under similar circumstances, seeking better opportunities and working tirelessly to support their families, only to encounter discrimination and hostility. Some considered leaving, believing they would never be truly accepted, while others remained resolute, determined to fight for their right to belong. The individuals responsible for the crime were eventually incarcerated, serving their sentences behind bars. Over time, debates arose about whether the two younger men, sentenced as minors, had genuinely been rehabilitated. Would they emerge from detention changed, or would their time only deepen their resentment? Could they ever fully grasp the gravity of their actions? While the justice system had delivered its verdict, true justice, preventing future tragedies, proved far more complex. In the year following the incident, a memorial was established in Dessous City Park, the very site where Alberto had been attacked. An inscription read, "In memory of Alberto Adriano, murdered because of racism, never again." This monument served both as a tribute and a warning, a lasting reminder that such hatred had no place in society. Every year, people gathered to lay flowers and speak out against discrimination, ensuring his memory endured. Yet as years passed, the immediacy of the moment faded. Public outrage diminished, political priorities shifted, and news stories dominated headlines. Those who had once marched for change found themselves distracted by other concerns. The cycle repeated itself: another hate-related incident, a period of reflection, and renewed promises that it would never happen again. For those directly affected, however, the struggle persisted. Activists pushed for stronger policies, improved education, and greater accountability. Survivors shared their stories, refusing to be silenced, while communities united in support against prejudice. In Dehus Park's quiet serenity, Alberto Adriano's memorial remained a steadfast symbol of both past horrors and hope for a better future. His story, like many others, was a painful reminder that hatred flourishes in silence. Justice is not solely about punishing wrongdoers, but also about ensuring history does not repeat itself. Change is possible, but only if people are willing to stand up and fight for it. As time moved forward and the world evolved, one truth remained clear: what happened to Alberto Adriano could never be undone. Yet his memory served as a vital lesson, one that demanded to be remembered and learned from, so that the cycle of hatred and violence could be broken for good.